Jen Brandel is someone I've known for a very long time because we worked together at WBEZ, where she launched this amazing project called Curious City, which was a user or an audience-driven, citizen-driven approach to reporting. She went on to found the company Harkin, which is taking this model to not only broadcast outlets, but all kinds of media companies and different organizations. So she's an amazing person, and I'm excited to see her here as part of Humanities Without Walls. Ben Austen, I read an amazing piece he did in the New York Times Magazine about a group working on Chicago's South Side called the Anti-Eviction Coalition. His writing about Chicago neighborhoods, Chicago citizens is just really incredible, and he has a book coming out about the history of Cabrini Green, famous public housing project, now largely gone in Chicago. And then Ellen McSweeney is a great musician. McSweeney.
That's okay.
No problem. McSweeney founded the Chicago Q String Quartet and is behind a lot of different interesting, enterprising musical experiments in Chicago. So I'm looking forward to hearing all of you talk together. So join me in welcoming Jen, Ben, and Ellen.
Okay.
You go first. You
All
were
right.
first.
Allison, how long should our spiel be for intro?
10 minutes or...
Okay.
Yeah. The Humanities Wall students are very lively, so they may jump in as you're talking.
Great. Okay, right on. Does anyone want to begin with their spiel?
You could go.
No,
Okay.
you should, yeah.
Okay, spieling, starting now. Please wave when I reach the 10-minute point or boredom, whichever comes first. So yeah, Alison mentioned I was at WBEZ for a long time, which is a public radio station just over on Navy Pier, of all places. Very weird to have a radio station in a theme park, basically, but that's where we were. But prior to that, so most of my 20s were spent gallivanting, trying to figure out what I didn't like, what I wasn't good at, and then by process of elimination, what I did like and what I was good at. But just by way of kind of like quick LinkedIn style profile, I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I studied all manner of things and ended up with a degree in art history and a focus in integrated liberal studies, just by virtue of the fact at like the 3.5-year mark, I looked at my credits and I thought, how do I graduate on time? And I just needed one more art history class, of all things, to graduate, or I could have taken 2 more anthropology or 2 more women's studies. But it just so happened that that was a clear pathway. I didn't imagine I would become an art historian or stay in that field necessarily, but I really was attracted to this idea of what does civilization look like at its best when all of our needs are met to the point where artists can thrive. Because it's hard to create art in an environment where you don't have your basic needs met, although people do it, and that's incredible. But that was kind of why I was focused on art history, was trying to see like, what does the world look like when you can self-actualize in these creative ways? Anyway, so after that, I learned about public radio right at the eve of kind of the end of my senior year. I was heading to a class. A friend of mine cut me off at the pass. He was like, you got to skip class and go see this guy speak at the student union. And I'm not a class skipping kind of gal, but there was like something in the air, and I was like, screw it, I'm a senior, I'm going to skip class. And I went, and it turned out there was this guy, Ira Glass, who was speaking. Yeah, I'd never heard of public radio until that moment. I grew up in a pretty blue-collar family who listened to talk radio and bad oldies stations. So I didn't know there was anything else on the dial. And that summarily blew my mind to hear him speaking. And immediately I was like, all right, I think I found my tribe. I don't know how to do what you do. I don't know what you're doing, but I need to figure out this public radio thing. So immediately I started volunteering at the local radio station, WORT, which is like the best call letters, WORT, in Madison. And then I wrote an insane cover letter to NPR for an internship on a piece of vellum, like this really nice paper. I hand calligraphed my resume just to stand out, which it worked, I will say. If you do something weird, they will notice you. And they called me up and they offered me an internship after just having heard about public radio. And stupidly, I said, you know what, could I do next time? I'm actually going to go work on a vineyard in Italy for a while and try and be a writer. And they're like, I'm sorry, we can't save a spot for you. So luckily I came to my senses the next day. I called them back and was like, will you please take me? I don't know what I was thinking. And they said yes. So long story short, I moved to Washington, D.C. And served on the arts and culture desk, which was really great and wonderful. I did zero reporting because you can't do reporting at that level with that juvenile of a mind. But it was an incredible environment to be around and really, really exciting. And after that, there were kind of two paths. It was stay at NPR and temp for 3 to 5 months for the rest of your life until maybe a position opens up and potentially you could be someone who they hire and who knows, which a lot of my friends did and some of them are now working there full time. To me, that felt like too nerve-wracking. So I quit there, or my internship expired really, and I decided to, at that point, move to Montreal, Canada. And this may or may not speak volumes about me, but I was trying to figure out, what do I do next? I need a sign. And in the course of a day, I was like, I need to figure out where I'm moving next. I heard 2 people mention the word Montreal, which I hadn't heard that much. And then my favorite band at the time, this band called Ween, came out with an album called Quebec. And I was like, done, moving to Montreal. So don't move to Montreal in January is what I learned. It's -40 in Fahrenheit and Celsius. They converge there. And I started working as a waitress, trying to use my really crappy French, which turns out is not the same as Quebecois, very different, to serve at a restaurant. This is something I feel like, where is this video going? Because there's something I'd love to say, but depending on how public it is.
It's going to YouTube.
Okay, we're going to skip this next part, and we can tell that part offline. But then I got a job as a psychometric test developer, of all things. So I was developing tests to test for certain aspects of a personality. So IQ tests, personality tests, Cosmo, what's your sex, personality in the bedroom test, really random things. And that was really interesting and fun, and kind of used the 8 psych classes I took in college to their utmost potential in that environment. And then I decided, wow, it's really cold here. I'm just working on a computer all day. I want to go somewhere warm and work with my hands and actually see the fruits of my labor literally like in front of me. So I moved to Tasmania to pick grapes on a vineyard for a while. And I had this romantic notion of, if I'm out in the fields all day, my mind will be just storing up these great ideas, and at night I'll want to write, and my boyfriend at the time will want to create his music, and we'll have this wonderful lifestyle. But it turns out, if you work manual labor for 10 hours a day in the blazing sun, you want to do nothing except eat food and maybe smoke some weed. And so that was not a very fruitful time for being creative. So anyway, moved back to Chicago. I was like, what the hell am I doing? I'm 23. I should have stayed at NPR. Trying to figure out what to do.
You did all that before 23.
Yeah, I know!
That was just 10 years worth of stuff.
Yeah,
I know!
I'll truncate the next portion of it. But so I moved to Chicago, tried to figure out what to do next, and this town ended up just being very welcoming. So I found everything I needed on Craigslist, a great roommate, some weird jobs, and just a spot to kind of perch and figure out what's next. And so over the course of the next few years, I just did a lot of odd jobs. I worked at a restaurant. I ghost wrote for a burlesque dancer. I ghost wrote for John Hughes, who passed away, who did all the Breakfast Club movie type of things. Worked on music videos for friends. Just kind of made myself artistically available to whoever had a few $100s to spare and a weird idea, which was really great. I learned a ton. I met a lot of people. I started a craft company and sold at what's now become like the Renegade type of craft fair things. Started an all-women's dance party thing called Dance Dance Party Party.
Oh, I'm sorry. They're really cool.
Yay! Have you gone?
Yeah.
Yes.
They're super fun.
Yay! Okay. I'm always so grateful when one person knows of that, and it's really fun.
Yeah.
It's no boys, no booze, no judgment, and it's just women who get together and dance like maniacs for an hour, and different women DJs every week. But what's cool is that actually that spread to 25 countries, and it's just a model of get together, turn the lights out, turn the music up. So anyways, always just dabbling with random things to scratch my creative itches. And I started pitching WBEZ as I was doing all these odd jobs, thinking that because I worked at NPR, they might take me seriously. And it worked, they did, even though I'd never reported anything in my life. So they started allowing me to pitch them things, and I would learn how to do stories on the fly, just with a very forgiving and wonderful editor, this lady Jenny Lawton, who's now at Studio 360 in New York. But she took me under her wing, taught me how to do things, was really kind to me when I was an idiot, and helped me figure out how to report stories. And so the table started to turn where I was pitching them, and then they started pitching me and saying, hey, we have a story we think you'd like to do, or we thought you would enjoy. And so it just kind of started shifting where they started asking me to do a lot more, and then suddenly I found myself as a general assignment reporter there. So in between there, the other major thing that I did for a while was I worked for the Baha'i Faith. I don't know if you guys know them. They're a faith group. They're out of Persia back in the 1800s. And they have a really amazing temple. If you guys have some time when you're here in Chicago, up in Wilmette, it's at the very end of the Purple Line off of Linden. It's a gorgeous structure. It's just worth going there and checking out the gardens and everything. Looks like a delivery. So I'll keep this short. So anyway, Baha'i was really awesome. I worked there for a while doing media for them, so figuring out how to shoot video, write video, edit, and do a lot of kind of storytelling with them. And so they really informed this approach to journalism that I started experimenting with at WBEZ. Their approach to community building was, we go into a community, we don't know best, the people who live there know best. How do we make ourselves available to them so that we can serve them? And I thought, wow, what if journalism was that way? Instead of journalism being like, we know best, we're the journalists, we're gonna tell you what you need to know, we know things none of y'all know, and here it is, take it or leave it. So anyway, Curious City was this approach to journalism where we started with the community and we started asking them, what questions do you have about Chicago, the region, or its people that you would like professional reporters to answer for you and fact check and validate? And so I did this project at WBEZ for a couple of years, and it turned out to go very, very well. So the stories were among the most popular stories ever on the website. The reporters really felt fulfilled because they got to meet the audience instead of as a nameless, faceless mass, as individuals who were really appreciative of the work that they were doing, and they got to participate. And Curious City just ended up kind of developing a reputation, and other newsrooms were asking me, how do we do this in my newsroom? And I had ideas, and I'd try and shoot them emails of just try this or use Google Forms and all this kind of stuff, until my curiosity got the best of me, and I thought, I think there's something scalable about this idea. So in order to figure that out, I can't be a reporter and a producer full time. I just don't have the time to figure out how to scale it. So I quit my job at the end of 2014. This was the first time I ever had healthcare and benefits in my life, and probably might be the last. But that was a blissful year of having that kind of stability, but I knew it just wasn't gonna last. So I started this company called Harkin a year and a half ago. Went into an accelerator program in San Francisco to learn how to figure out a business. How does capital work? How does fundraising work? How do all of these elements you need to run a business work? And then have been running it ever since. So we grew from a staff of 1, which was me, to now we have 9 people. We're based in Chicago, though we have a couple people in different cities. And we're trying to help news outlets and journalism do audience-first journalism. So how do you start with your community? How do you bring them into the editorial process before you make all the decisions on their behalf? And what happens when you do that? So we've scaled now from 1 newsroom in Chicago to 54 newsrooms in 8 countries and 7 languages so far. And we're hoping that this becomes a model that's an accepted model for doing journalism in other spaces. But so I figured out, basically, I think I've always been an entrepreneur and didn't realize it because I was just an entrepreneur of one, just figuring out weird projects. But now the whole kind of spirit of being your own boss and being really setting your own path now has been grown to this whole team, which is a different kind of responsibility that is very stressful. And the gray hairs and the bags and the eyes are growing at a rapid pace because of needing to think of other people's livelihoods instead of my own. But yeah, that's the long, short story of the weird path of the humanities and art that ended with me right here, right now. Mm-hmm. So, all right, sorry.
Please, no, yeah.
Hey, everybody. That's hard to follow.
Sorry.
Great. I'm Ben Austen. I'm from Chicago. So I'm a freelance writer. I worked at Harper's Magazine for several years as an editor. And I write for probably, I don't know, I've probably written for 12 to 20 different magazines over the last, 7 to 10 years. But I think I started out, maybe I was like you guys. I had gone to graduate school. I liked writing and I liked literature, and there was sort of a vague notion of which was guiding my path. I had a Fulbright in South Africa, and I got a master's there at the University of Cape Town, and I came back and I ended up landing a job as a teacher at a prep school, which I ended up doing for several years and was great. And at the same time, teaching writing and teaching classes, I would write for local newspapers wherever I lived. Mostly this is back when there were book review sections still at other papers besides, say, just the Times. And I guess I always just had a notion that I wanted to do more writing. I mean, it was something, a kind of idealized version of it in my mind. And so I applied for an internship at Harper's Magazine. And to be honest, like, reading Harper's and The Atlantic and The New Yorker, I mean, sort of like doing those things that the writers there were doing, I wanted to do, but beyond like saying that, I didn't like, know how to report or go and do it. And, I mean, it's interesting to think about the role of like an internship at an institution like that, and, sort of all the issues about, class and doing it for free, and, who's selected and who's not. But it was an unpaid internship. I was 30 years old. I remember one of the editors, the dilettante there, sitting down for drinks the first day, and I think one of the other interns, I mean, they were kids, where he looks at him and he was the first intern to be born in the 80s. And he's like, that's unbelievable. And then he looks at me and says, and you're 30, that's pitiful. It was funny. I did ride my bike home through Manhattan thinking like, oh, but it was, I don't know, it was like a second education. I mean, sort of, there's a whole different kind of canon of magazine writers, and like sort of working in literature and academia, like thinking about who these writers are. I just hadn't really thought about it in this way, and like the idea of the craft and like the whole process. And so I did the internship, and I got hired to stay on first as a fact checker, then as an editor, and sort of worked my way up. And I don't know, it was difficult and interesting, and it was the Bush years, and like felt like I was mixed up in this, dealing with it in some way that was really exciting. And at the same time, I also wanted to write, and so I had one of the things that you get from working at an institution like this, even for free, are connections. And so someone is going to trust you to do something and maybe even hold your hand a little bit. So I wrote a book review, I wrote an essay, and eventually, for sort of personal reasons, my wife took a job in Nashville. I went, we moved, I left Harper's, and I became a full-time freelancer, a full-time writer. And sort of this idea of giving it a shot, which is sort of like, I guess, like the third job I had already at this point, big career shift. And the first piece that I wrote was during the financial crisis, and when two of the big three auto companies were, in bankruptcy, and I went to a town in Kentucky called Georgetown, where there's the biggest Toyota plant, and sort of reported on this idea of like the non-union company town, sort of in this moment. And luckily, like, I had an editor who was my friend, we had kids at the same time, like this is the kind of thing that helps. And so I went there first to Georgetown. I drove there from Nashville on my own dime and sort of reported, and I was able to sort of do this slowly and get a cover story in Harper's. And so, and also discovered like how much I loved reporting. Like the idea of just going to a place and sort of, it's like the aperture is just open. You're like taking in all the information. And I learned a lot by editing and by, all the other, I already knew sort of how stories worked. But it was just exhilarating, and sort of to be an observer and to think about how to tell a story and to craft it and to meet people and like, you sort of have experiences that you wouldn't have normally. So I just used that to get more writing. One of the things that's sort of fortunate for me that happened is Harper's, the magazine where I worked, sort of blew up a little bit. Like there was, the workers tried to unionize, a lot of people were fired, and I had already left. But what happened was all my connections sort of dispersed to these other magazines. So someone went to Wired, someone else went to the New Republic, someone went to the New York Times Magazine, someone went to a science magazine, someone went to Grantland, someone went to Elle, and I wrote for all these places. And not all of them because I knew people personally. Sometime after I had a kind of, 10, 12 stories under my belt, what happened, what you were described happened, people started reaching out to me, which is a great thing. But, sort of coming up with stories, thinking about what's important, what I want to write, doing some things just because you're a professional writer, like, writing for a science magazine about sort of like, where outer space exploration is. It wasn't something I had any interest in, but, just sort of being, just doing it as a job. And sort of in this, one of the stories I wrote for Harper's was about Cabrini Green, which is a public housing development that was very near here. 23 towers stood just about 10 blocks away. And so when the last one came down, I wrote a story about it and sort of its significance and where the people went and what the big project was, the development project in Chicago to get rid of the towers across the entire city. And eventually shopped a book deal around in New York and sort of got a book contract to write this with HarperCollins, and sort of for the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years have been living with like this long-term project, sort of writing a book and also taking short-term assignments. So in my mind, that seemed like the perfect, ideal way to work. I mean, I remember when I didn't have a book contract and I would have a magazine assignment and I would finish one and I would have nothing. And it would be like, holy shit, what am I going to do? Am I ever going to get another one? And you start hustling, and then something would come around. So this, I always have this other thing to work on. That seems great. It's sort of horrible too. It's like, you could like, it's like always having finals, and like that you're studying for. But it is like I get to sort of pick and choose differently. When assignments I want to do. I wrote something about Laquan McDonald, the shooting that happened here for the Times Magazine this summer, and that seemed like something important and I wanted to do. I was just telling these guys that Billboard Magazine called me 2 weeks ago and said, did I want to write about Chance the Rapper, who's a local rapper here? And sort of, the kind of calculus that you do in a situation like this is like, I have a deadline for my book and like, what's the reporting? Well, you're going to go with him and hang out in the studio. Okay, that's only one night of work, and how long is it? It's 2,000 words. How much does it pay? This is significant. It's going to pay $2 a word, so it's $4,000. And you're like, okay. And that might sound like a ton, right? I mean, or not. I don't know what that sounds like, but one of the things I could talk to you about is I'm happy to talk about actual money, like how much you get for this stuff, because this is like to make it work. So if it's going to be 3 weeks or 4 weeks worth of work, right? So then you're like, well, $4,000 a month, for a month of work, it's not terrible, but like this is the one assignment. And so you're thinking like how this works into everything, because nothing is ever clean. Like it's someone else's curated space in a magazine. And like it's interesting when you were talking, like I think I've been much more institutional in my choices. Like I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur really. Like I've sort of attached myself to old time institutions like the New York Times. And so Billboard Magazine is going to have some decisions, and we're going to fight about some things, and they're going to want some shitty lines, and I won't want them, and I'm going to be unhappy for a while, and then it'll come out, and I'll feel okay. That's sort of like everything you do. Like at some point, it's the worst thing ever, and you're not going to get it done, and then at some point, you're like, oh, there it is, okay, let's move on. So thinking about, just that assignment, and like, and I'm interested in the subject. I mean, this is a wonderful musician, local. He's doing amazing things. He's coming up. It'll be kind of fun to hang out and to see what that world is like. So I took it. But there are several recently that I didn't take. And, not that I'm getting, calls all the time, but sometimes it happens. And, I was thinking, too, about, like, the difference of the book and the assignments. It's like, in kind of academic terms, like the book is like a PhD, and like the magazine work is like are like these master's papers that I write. And I feel like I'm a generalist, and in some ways going into this work and having a very specific subject can be more lucrative. You can be the expert in that, but it really fits my sensibility. Like maybe the specific thing I write about, as Alison said, is like, is Chicago. I love Chicago, and I'm thinking about it, I'm like fascinated by it and its history and its fucked upness, which I feel like I own in some way, and I want to explore that. But I also can write about chance, or Kerry Washington, or Cars, or anything. Like, I'm interested in just going places and learning things. And the idea of like having that semester paper or whatever you want to think of it is like going in and delving in and feeling like you own this topic, but not that you have to like it's not like a child or something like what the a dissertation is like. It's like, this is cool, and then like it's also packed up and then done, and it sits on a shelf somewhere after 4 months, sometimes more. So yeah, at this point in my career, like we could talk, you could ask questions later about like how you get assignments, and I feel like what I do more is write for national audience. So there's even a kind of like view that I have being local, and what stories would translate somewhere else, which it often means to a New York editor. So like something happens here and it seems like a big deal, or something happens in Minnesota or Ohio or wherever, and like why would they care about it everywhere, and also specifically the person who's going to assign it in New York? And so how do you think of like the local story and sort of as a long-term something that sort of is lasting and bigger than sort of a daily. And I have never written really for daily newspapers. It's usually been weeklies and monthlies and long-form stuff, which is also fun to do, but a different kind of writing. So.
Wow, I'm so fascinated by what you guys have both said. My head is just absolutely spinning. I'll see if I can remember my own life. I love writers, God, and I am one too. And it's funny because as I'm listening to you guys talk, so I'm a classical violinist who's been in quasi identity crisis for my whole career as a classical violinist. Speaking of being a generalist, being a classical musician is an extremely narrow discipline by nature. You commit very early. I started playing the violin when I was 9, which is considered quite late. Yeah, so you start working, very seriously at what you do, essentially as a child. And it's not until maybe early adulthood, if you're talented and you love it, which I did, it's not until early adulthood that you kind of look back over your shoulder and say, how did I get here? Because in order to succeed, you almost have no choice but to put your blinders on, get into the practice room, work really hard. I would say I worked less hard than a lot of my peers, which is probably how I ended up with like an English literature major also, and I'm obviously not a specialist. I am not a good specialist at all, but I've managed to work hard enough for the violin to do it professionally. I was born to 2 classical singers when they were 23 and 24 years old. My mom was a waitress when I was born, and my dad was moving furniture. So the whole time I've been alive, I've known that musicians, my parents were, classical singers who had day jobs. That's kind of been a trope or an imprint or something in my life to know that as an artist, it's really challenging to make a full-time living doing what you do, especially as a singer. I also sing, and my mom didn't want me to study voice because she said violin was more practical, which it is. For example, in the Chicago Symphony, those players make 6 figures. The chorus are contractors who make $75 a service. Whoa. So singing and instrumental playing can be 2 totally different worlds as a labor market. That's the other weird thing about being a classical musician and also, being a writer too. It is in a way a labor market. I am often paid, you guys are paid by the word. We're paid, per service. Show up for 3 hours and play with an orchestra and walk away with a $125 check, and that's kind of the end of it. So anyway, I grew up in Massachusetts. I ended up moving to Nashville to study classical violin, kind of a funny thing. So I have a bachelor's in violin performance and creative writing from Vanderbilt. And then I lived in Africa for a year where I taught children violin, cello, piano, singing, because there were not too many classically trained musicians in the school where I was working, and so I did a lot of different things. I came back here to Chicago for a former relationship and ended up getting a master's in violin performance at DePaul. You guys are mostly Illinois natives or not necessarily? No, okay. Anyway, so I got a master's in violin at DePaul, and I guess most of my artistic career has really been devoted to working in small teams of artists who are trying to build something new. The contemporary classical music scene in Chicago is really, really lively, so meaning living composers, people who are writing music right now. And when I moved here, that scene was really taking off. A couple of groups like Eighth Blackbird, Third Coast Percussion, groups who, if you're familiar with this world, you will know, were taking off. And so I was here when a lot of little entrepreneurial teams were being born. And I started my own, which was called Chicago Q Ensemble. We started as a group of 5. We're now actually a group of 3. But it's funny because maybe parallel to the humanities, I don't know, in schools of music right now, there's a lot of discussion about entrepreneurial work, which basically means that in classical music, a lot of the opportunities are increasingly hard to get or are disappearing. A lot of orchestras are folding. So I think there's kind of parallel crisis in higher education and in the arts. So, but they say they've always been saying there's a crisis in the arts. You know, for the past 200 years, they've been saying this. Classical music has been dying for 200 years. But so that's kind of the framework that I came out of like, it's really hard to get an orchestra job. Ben was telling me he has a friend in the St. Louis Symphony. Getting into a symphony is like, kind of like being an Olympic athlete. Most people who graduate with a degree in music are not going to get that job. Getting that job is kind of like getting struck by lightning. So what am I going to do instead? And so that's a question that I and a lot of my peers have been asking. So I started my own ensemble. I was part of a team that started a record label here in Chicago called Parlor Tapes, which was a total blast. The thing about being a freelancer is your career feels so disorganized. I mean, talking to you guys about what I do, I'm like, I don't know if this is making any sense. But what I have discovered for myself is that where like monetization, and I've been very uninstitutionalized also. It's been very sort of DIY, mostly detached from big institutions that can provide, you know, major support. And I think I've discovered that I'm okay with that. This year, for the first time, I had a 9-to-5 day job for about 6 months. And it was this grass is greener thing that Ben was talking about before we started talking to you. I was so tired of the insecurity of not knowing where my next check was going to come from that I kind of cracked. Even though actually I was getting better and better gigs and more high pressure work, I kind of couldn't deal with it and went and got a day job. And it was so not the right thing for me. And yet it was such a good decision to take that job because now I know what it's like to be behind a desk 40 hours a week, and I don't have any more illusions about that anymore. So I think freelancing, as Ben said, it's a privilege to be a freelancer because you have to take a certain amount of economic risk, and not everyone has that ability or wants to make that choice. So you have to be willing to assume a good amount of risk, which I have. But I think for me, I've kind of learned to separate what sometimes what earns me money. Like I'll play a wedding, I'll play on stage with a rock band I don't particularly like. You know, I'll play for a conductor who I don't care for, and that's actually not really the relationship I want to have with the violin or with my voice or with composing. But in order to keep my relationship with music sacred, I have to make compromises other places. So I guess that's just a general way of talking about how I've come to feel about making music and making money at the same time. Yeah, I've taught kids, and I should say I've also been a bit of a music journalist in the sense that I love to write about what's happening in my musical community. So there was a festival here in Chicago called the Beethoven Festival, speaking of freelancing, that kind of collapsed last minute and couldn't pay its musicians. So they owed me $1,500, which for me was a ton of money, and they couldn't pay it. And so there was like this silence in the Chicago musical community. We can't talk about this because we're all sort of still hoping to get our checks. We didn't tell anyone that we hadn't been paid, and then they announced a new festival before they'd paid us. And I was like, oh no, this is not happening. So the publication I was writing for at the time, which is an online magazine, I wrote about it. And it was kind of a mix of like a really personal piece about the fact that I was broke, with the fact that this festival had not yet paid its musicians. And this is not uncommon in classical music. There are some sort of employers who should be on a blacklist or are on a blacklist who don't pay on time. So that was like kind of that piece was very widely read in my field, and it was unusual that someone would come forward and talk about bad labor practices and paying practices in classical music. I think they still owe me a couple $100, like small checks were sort of coming. But so as a writer, I'm and as an artist, I love what you said about if people have their needs met, what can they create? So as a writer, I'm very interested in just talking to my community of artists about what's going on with them, and how they're surviving, because it's quite fascinating to hear how they do survive and the choices that they do make. So as a writer, that's what I'm really interested in, is kind of the inner lives of artists and how they manifest that in their work. So I guess that's it. Yeah.
I wanted to have you, are there any immediate questions people have? If not, I was going to have you talk about what Ben called the hustle, which I think, Ellen, you've been talking about fairly well, right? But just sort of what's involved, and especially when you're at that point where you don't have the 10 or 12 articles, you don't have the repertoire, the profile within a musical community, or you're not considered
I don't know. I think I'd say the biggest currency is ideas. So like that you come up with a fresh idea that other people don't have. So you can reach out to somebody. It's not like you can say, call up, the Washington Post and be like, man, I really want to go report on the Democratic National Convention. That would be really cool. And because, yeah, it would be, but you're not bringing anything fresh or original. Why should we send you, unless you're the person that like, it'd be really great if this person went there and that would be fascinating. But you need to come up with a fresh idea. That's the currency. And so you reach out to somebody, and that's, you sit around, you have lists, you like reading things, you're like, developing ideas, and then you write these pitches, you write these proposals. And how, if you're a writer, like if you're trying to get a writing gig, like how they're written matters, right? Like people are going to judge you on the writing. You got to sort of work your connections of like, who do I know at GQ, so they'll actually like read this. And so, let me call this person and that person and send the email there. And follow up. And I just, do you send them to multiple places? I mentioned taking that trip to Georgetown, Kentucky on my own dime. Like I've done, the amount of reporting I've done that nothing has come out of it is immense, probably equal to the amount of reporting that actually like led to things, So, you think there's a story there, like this. I was working on something about tech education, and so like I went to the MacArthur Foundation, what they were doing. I went to these classrooms, and it just didn't pan out. It just but that's part of what you're doing. I mean, if you're a scientist, what percentage of your experiments are going to sort of lead to results? And so I think you have to think of it that way as well.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, more questions, yeah.
It's okay, I can ask it later.
Oh, all right. Well, we could take questions or we could riff on this longer. What do you guys feel like?
I have a follow-up.
Yeah.
When is it that you go from, do you still do projects where people that you haven't had a guarantee that will be published? When is the shift from doing the go on your own dime someplace?
So only once have I written something without certainty that it was going to be without an assignment. So I've done a lot of reporting, but in terms of actually like the
Writing.
the hundreds of hours, that's going to take to write something, like to turn all, like the reporting is exhilarating. Like you're just amassing all this cool shit. Like and like you have this platonic notion the whole time, like this is just gonna be the greatest. Like, and then when you sit down to write, you're like how do I sort of, get this through the needle that's gonna turn it into something and shape it. And so that takes so long that like only once, and I knew it was such a good story. It was actually the story that Alison was talking about, the anti-eviction campaign. And it was also related to my book, and so I wrote this big, 8,000 word thing that I was like, I felt confident. But I think I still have, for me, like, there's still a lot of things that I research that don't come to pass, right? Like that's just, but if a magazine calls me, they want that. And it's limiting in some way, but that's a guarantee that that's set. But like,
But even in that case, can't they like kill the story, or does that ever happen where they assign you something and then you're like, they decide they're not going to print it?
they could. So I think that's only happened to me once. And then I was able, so there's a kill fee, which is like they, generally in your contract, it's a quarter of whatever they promise to pay you. So, and then it's just, you could sell it somewhere else or do something. And I immediately sold that piece to another, but, yeah.
Well, it's funny though, because I know a lot of musicians who, the more established they become, the less room they feel to just like chase down a passion project. It's sort of like, when do you just do something because you want to, not necessarily because someone is paying you or because you're on assignment. And I think, but some of the people whose work is most interesting are the ones who, what they were doing, like they would do it anyway. I mean, they need to get paid, that's really important. But I think in music, you see someone really, like they can't but do this, and that's sort of paradoxically the people whose work becomes interesting and then becomes more in demand. So I think it's important to be doing what you really want to do, because I think that work has a fire behind it. Of course, in the craft of writing, you have to make the reader feel that fire, even if it's a science piece you're not that into. But I think in music, I've noticed the people who would do it anyway, it often, if they're smart, those are the people whose careers kind of take off. So.
Yeah, and I think there's this, I think you can systematize your thinking about when to say yes or no about this a little bit, in terms of, I had guideposts for myself that like flexed a little bit here and there, but I would like pretty much throughout my 20s, I was like, if I have $2,000 in my bank account at any given time, then I'm doing okay. Which now, as someone in my 30s is like, it's a little scarier, just $2,000, what goes wrong. But at that time, it was like, it was okay. And my threshold for risk was so high that I was willing to say, all right, what's the worst that could happen? I have to sleep on a friend's couch for 6 months, or I need to call in favors or whatever. Like, I was okay with that. To me, the hardest part is dealing with your ego and being like, oh, I shouldn't be sleeping on a couch unemployed. That feels really crappy. But like, I can do it. I can survive. It's going to be okay. I will have friends. I will have food. I will have shelter. And that's like the level I was willing to go to take risks. So I had this $2,000 mark of like, if for 3 months in a row I'm under the $2,000 mark, then I need to start reassessing everything, and I need to potentially get a full-time job or get something that's more stable that I'm not as excited about doing but can bring money in. So I had these kind of like little triggers that when those would hit, I would reassess and do something that I wasn't as excited about, or I couldn't say I would do something on spec because I just couldn't like financially handle that burden. So if I was over $2,000 and someone asked me to do something that maybe would pan out or maybe didn't, but I knew I'd learn a lot and I knew it would be interesting, I would say yes. So I kind of had these little, flags to stay between.
Yeah, and I think most freelance musicians who I've heard of, it's like a triangle. There's the money, there's how much you're going to enjoy it, and then I don't know, what's the third one? Yeah, it's money, it's enjoyment, and I think that learning piece too, or like, what could this lead to? And of course, that's sort of the $1 million question. Like, I've gotten some great gigs that happened because I was somewhere that I was like, I guess I'll do this. And then there's someone in the audience who's like, I really love your work, come do this thing. And it pays 10 times as much, or it's 10 times as much fun or whatever. So you're constantly gambling. You're constantly gambling. But if it's good people involved, it's, especially when you're young, it's easy to kind of say yes, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And just I'll add one thing, and then, for me, thinking about the question about doing stuff just on spec. I mean, I'm also working in a field where like I'm turning the world into meaning in some way, and like I could be sitting around reading a novel, or I could go to like a community meeting, and like, or I can go to a concert, and like those are things that might add to something I'm writing. But like being there for that time, or like talking to the MacArthur people, or visiting this school, it's like interesting in itself. And like in the end, like it's a day I could have got more work done, and there's a monetary calculation there, but I was like, I kind of learned something like that day, and that was cool, and like it's going to feed something, I'm hoping, down the line, in the same way that you read a book, right? And you're like, I feel like I know something. I don't know exactly how that's going to play into my life, but so generally I can at least make myself feel better about it in that way. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it sounds like a lot of what success at something like freelance looks like is a combination of like skill, passion / determination, and chance. And so I was wondering if any of you could talk about, not by name or anything, but some people who have tried to pursue something like starting their own business or being a freelance writer or musician and did not succeed or quit, or any permutation of that, and what the reasons were, or what didn't work out.
Well, how about me taking a full-time job? I mean, I essentially did quit, but then I came back, which is funny. But I know a lot of musicians who quit and don't come back, and that's also okay. Like, I know a couple singers who are like, when I got into this, I told myself, I don't have to do this. I can leave. Like, my work is not me. Like, if it's too much, if it's too scary, I can stop. And I actually think that's really important. I think quitting, not necessarily being a failure, is a good framework to have. I think you discover really quickly if you're in it for the right reasons. The other reason that I quit is because my mother had died. I was kind of depressed. I was sort of confused about, like, life stuff happens. And I don't have, like, a book deal, but I want a book deal to write about, like, musicians' life crises, because I'm kind of on the other side of a really hard time, looking back and knowing so many of my peers are going through, like, anxiety and depression, like, financial insecurity, life stuff. Life stuff happens. I think that's really important. Sometimes you're not in a place to be like, I don't know, where's my next check coming from? This is going to be great. So for me, it was like I wasn't in a good enough place, and I needed to just like get a job. And I think that's okay. And you might feel stronger 3 years later and try again. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing I would say about quitting or failure, is it has a lot to do with just where you're at personally.
Yeah, and I'd add to that in terms of like freelancing and how it looks to the outside. So you might be a freelancer at one point in your career, and you might be doing it for very different reasons than you're doing it later. So I think knowing your motivations and knowing why you're doing it, like I wrote a few notes so I could remember this, but in the course of my life, I freelanced for various reasons at different times. So there was a time where I was freelancing because there was a job out there I knew I wanted, but I just hadn't found it yet. So I was using freelancing as a kind of grappling hooks to try and figure out what that job was. And then I figured out there wasn't a job out there that I really wanted. Mm-hmm. And then you could freelance because, or you could stop freelancing because, never mind. You can freelance because you could have a job, but you just prefer the flexibility in your life, whether it's because you're in a phase of life where you need more flexibility, where you don't want to have a boss, or where you're in demand enough where you can make those choices and say, I want to work on Tuesdays and Sundays, and that's it, or whatever. Like, Lord help us if we can get to that point. That'd be great. So you might be freelancing for different reasons there, or you might be freelancing because you're in a moment of self-exploration and you're trying to figure out what do I like, what am I good at, what don't I like, what aren't I good at. So I feel like, and there's probably 10 other permutations of it, but doing what you're doing can look very different, and the energy behind it can feel very different depending on why you're doing it. Like, I feel like there's freelancing because you're kind of doing it in a moment of desperation, and that sucks and that's hard, or you're freelancing because you're in this moment of like flaring out in the world and discovery and that exhilaration of finding out what you like and what you're good at. So kind of knowing those stressors and the energy behind why you're doing it, I think can help you make better choices as to how long you want to do that for.
You were one of the first ones. So
No, it's a different question now, but I guess how I hate this phrase, the gig economy, but you know, like driving for Uber or Lyft or doing stuff on TaskRabbit, do you see a lot of the people in your various freelance communities doing stuff to fill that kind of stuff to fill gaps, or does that kind of feel like, oh, this is like work I really don't want to be doing because it's not fulfilling my creative stuff? Or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a lot of friends who do gig economy types of things. You know, some drive for Lyft, some do, you know, little pieces for people they're not excited about. They're copywriting for, you know, credit card companies, you know, internal documentation, stuff that they're not excited about, but those are like their version of the gig economy so they can finish their novel or, you know, start a soap company or whatever it is they're doing on the side. So I think I really don't know many people, I should say, who have escaped this kind of need to fill in the gaps here and there with some sort of mortar that they're not like, they don't want to work with forever. But
Yeah, I think that, I was thinking about this morning. Ideally, for me, my gigs that I'm not that excited about, I literally just think like, how can I make the most money in the least amount of time with the least like friction to myself so that I can do my work, you know? And that's not just a cold calculation. I've started doing, actually it's really funny, I've started doing kind of coaching and consulting work with people in my field, and I now have 2 clients who I read their dissertation draft every week and we have a meeting about it. I have another client who's like a small music publishing company. I do their like email marketing. Like, oh wow, that's so loud. Some paper is just like really crinkly. So like that, I can do that from home. Like I can talk to those people with pajama pants on, but that's also, it's really fun. So I'm making an excellent hourly rate and I love helping them. And it's not hard for me, but it took me like years to find that. I was teaching little kids and I was like, so I guess if you can find a fun way to make the most money in the least amount of time, obviously you've got it made, but that takes years to figure out, I think. And the reason those people will pay me to do that is because I've amassed enough skill and knowledge to actually help them. That's why they will pay me what I'm asking them to. There's a really great book that I love. You guys might have read it. It's called So Good They Can't Ignore You. This is like one of the most valuable career books I've ever read. It's sort of one of those things that's like, no, you shouldn't do what you love. You need to get a skill that people will pay you for. But it sounds horrible, but it's not. It's like a fabulous, fabulous book. Anyway, so I have slowly but surely become more of a mercenary with my time, and it has helped my creative work to be more of a mercenary with my time. Unfortunately, as we know, a lot of those like driving for Lyft, that's not a good return on your investment. Like you are getting a PhD in something. There is something that you could do. I know it. It's there. But of course, it has to drive those cars. So it's sort of, I guess that's what I would say. Yeah.
I'm wondering, so I used to freelance at a certain point of time. I used to do voice work in India. But I've come here, so it's been a big change for me. And I'm wondering, like, how do you talk money in terms of like when people ask you for, I don't know how it works here because I used to be asked what I'm going to charge for my services, and because you lose that comfort of, you know, sliding into a pay structure of an organization when you're working. So when you're on your own and you have to quote your own amount, like what are the if there are any resources, or what are the reference points that you use at all, if at all? Like?
yeah, in terms of money, I think, yeah, just the value of any denomination has changed so radically for me depending on the moment of time, where I'll be like, $1,000 is amazing, and other times it'll be like $1,000, there's no way I can do even the same amount of hour, you know, work for that kind of money. So I feel like it's just my relationship to money has changed dramatically, and it will continue to. I think about this idea, a friend of mine mentioned this to me, I'm sure someone famous said it, but something like you teach people how you want them to treat you. So if you value your own self and your own services at a certain amount, and some people can't afford it, that's okay. there is a market for what the amount you think you deserve and the amount of knowledge and skill and professionalism you bring to things. You just need to find that market. And that might be 5 people instead of 50 because they can't afford you at that level. But you have to make a decision here and there about, are you willing to accept a no, even if it's something you want to do because you value your services. And it's been really cool to see a lot of my friends who are freelancers ask for things that they feel are absurdly high, and places will then view them to say, you must be that good. Okay, I'm going to talk to my boss, and I got it approved. And they're like, oh my God. And then the next job they have, they can say, well, my last gig paid me X amount per hour. And suddenly now they're on a road where they can be more stable by just valuing themselves more and kind of being willing to say no. But that's hard, and you can't always do it depending on the month that you're in or the moment that you're in.
Ellen, I've been very interested in your path. I'm a musician and an ethnomusicologist.
Oh,
I'm
very cool.
interested in the words that you're using around what you're doing in terms of the sacred nature that you have with your musical career and passion, but also the need for entrepreneurship. I am very interested and skeptical of these entrepreneur programs in music schools, and wanted to know, as you being in this field, what might be some suggestions that you would make for those types of programs, or even that type of thinking within the music school environment.
What's your instrument?
Guitar and bass.
Okay. I love musicologists so much. Let's see. I think that, so a lot of the entrepreneurship programs in schools of music are trying to teach business skills, some of which are really valuable. Actually, you do need to know like basic web stuff, how to not be terrible on social media, how to write a grant, super important, although sometimes the return on the investment is not great, so we need to be real about that. But what I would add to the entrepreneurship mindset and curriculum just has a lot to do with inner work. Because of what I said earlier, musicians narrow their focus so early and think they know what they want to do so quickly that they don't always think about why they want to work as a musician. And when they get into the world, it is a rude awakening. Because training as a musician is a blast. Like college is a blast. I mean, this is true for every discipline, but like, you're going to Switzerland and you're playing under Pierre Boulez and you're 22 and I'm in Aspen playing under David Zinman and I feel really great. And those are not the gigs that I'm going to get when I graduate. It's like there's this kind of training bubble of prestige. So anyway, I would just add a lot of like, why do you want to do this work? And like really evaluating like what you're okay with in terms of financial insecurity, because I've been really increasingly on this path where I really want to be able to devote myself to a musical undertaking, and that's not something that's really talked about. You know, if like you really kind of want to devote yourself, like what might you have to give up? You know, just kind of like discernment, like what they do in divinity school, what they do with social workers, because it's kind of a life of sacrifice, and I don't think that that's talked about enough. So I think some kind of discernment and some reality check would be really good. But of course, college kids aren't scared enough to care when you talk to them about this. They're like, I'm gonna be fine. And then when they're like 28, they're like, oh my God. I mean, I wish that the college would like call everyone back about like 8 years after graduation, be like, okay, so now are you ready? And we'll be like, yes, and we'll be like writing it down. Because I don't think talking to like 20 and 21-year-olds about arts entrepreneurship and how hard it's gonna be, I don't think it really gets through.
And I just wanted to add a point to that around that discernment and figuring out what it is you actually like and doing the inner work. I think as a society, we're really obsessed with the particulars and the label of what's your title and where you work and what your company is, these proxies for like who you are and what you care about. But if you go like one more level up of why are you doing this work, and you ask yourself those questions of, you know, keep asking why, and why do you care about that, and why does that matter to you, and what is your core kind of purpose and or desire to make a difference or to do something. I realized like I got really attached to this idea of being a reporter because it was sexy and it was fun and it was interesting. And then when I realized that wasn't the only manifestation of these things that I liked, I figured out the things that motivate me are curiosity and compassion. and what can I do in my career that will always be increasing my desire to know more and keep that curiosity alive and increase my ability to be compassionate toward others. Like if I start becoming less compassionate, I need to switch a job. So those are the things. That means like, oh my God, I could do anything with that lens. It doesn't matter what the title is or what the position or what the pay, well, pay matters to some extent, of course, but if you can level up to be like, what are the core virtues, things, ideas that you want to play with, no matter what the that little nice little tidy container is for it, I feel like your options are really hugely expanded.
And as you know, that discussion is completely missing from music, and probably from a lot of disciplines too.
Yeah.
But what's crazy is that we're supposed to be the healers, and we're supposed to be speaking to people's souls, and we're supposed to be expressing, and it's still really absent. So.
There's also the starving artist narrative that goes along with it.
Right, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Jen, can I have you say a little bit more about, so you discovered the things that drive your curiosity and compassion, like what was we've had lots of people talk about like what color is your parachute, or trying to figure out what is it that you actually are, how do you distill that, and then how do you apply it, because you could take qualities and apply them a lot of different directions. So can you talk a little bit more about what that process was like for you?
Yeah, it was definitely messy, and I feel like in retrospect, there's always that nice thing of like, oh, now it all makes sense, and for 15 existential crisis years in a row, it didn't. So like it might feel very neat and tidy now, and it's not, and it wasn't, and it probably will continue to change. But I think it was almost that like family party mirror thing that kept coming up of like people being like, so what are you up to now? And I tell them, and they're like, are you ever gonna find something you really like? Like, oh, that's too bad you're not, applying yourself in this way. Because my narrative is, I went on the wild goose chase before, is not something that's really acceptable and or like, I guess lauded by most people. They just think you're lost instead of you're searching and you're exploring and you're enjoying it. So I really had to defend myself for a long time in front of anyone. My friends were getting all these amazing jobs and they're doing all this stuff, and I'm just look like this weird wandering Jewess in the world, which my grandma calls me the wandering Jew. Anyway, so I think a lot of it had to come down with like, no, there is a unifying thesis. There is something that connects all these things. You might not see there's a narrative here, and I had to figure out what that narrative was for myself. And I think it was a lot of soul searching and asking those questions and having those crises of, okay, well, if I don't want to do this job forever, what aspects of it are lighting me up? What aspects of it are making me feel fulfilled at the end of the day? And it was always when I got to do the reporting, that exhilarating work of running out in the world and having these experiences that I would never have otherwise, that ignited me. So this curiosity. And then the compassion part was just kind of witnessing people closing down as they got older and becoming more opinionated and becoming more hardened. And I just knew that like that would be the most depressing thing that I could imagine for myself, is regardless of what I'm doing, if I become cold and unfeeling and apathetic or even angry at everyone. So it's just like, how can I create experiences that constantly challenge me to become more compassionate? And something I'm not proud of, but I'm willing to admit, is that when I started working for the Baha'i Faith, I thought of myself as someone who's like extremely open-minded, and I didn't have prejudice, and I, was someone who could get along with anyone. And I realized I was prejudiced against religious people, and that was something that I had a hard time admitting to myself, because I didn't grow up in a religious environment, and I grew up, in a mixed religion family and everything. And going into that and working for a faith for which I was not a member, to which I was not a member, was really good at expanding my compassion for people who had different belief systems as I did. So. It's a long way of saying it was a matter of I needed something to hold on to during this, to create meaning out of something that could look meaningless if you looked at just the crazy resume kind of aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And it was really freeing to create that meaning. And I'm also open to the fact or reserve the right to change that narrative and to change that story and later on put a different thesis statement on my life, because who cares? I'm the only one who has to live up to it. So. Right now it's curiosity and compassion. Maybe it'll change or be something else, but no one gets to grade you on that. You get to decide it.
This is a question for Jen. So I'm a sound engineer by trade. Before I went back to finish my BA and pursued graduate school, I worked in studios and stuff like that. So my question is about what the interactions are like say Curious City or other NPR programs, between sound engineers, producers, and the actual reporters that go out and collect the sound files and stuff like that.
Yeah.
because partially I like went into academia because I felt like the studio I worked at did mostly like books on tape.
Oh, cool.
Kind of cool. Yeah. It got a little bit like boring.
Yeah.
And I was like, my brain is not being stimulated enough.
Yeah.
We did a lot of like K through 12. Like we had Hope and Mifflin as one of our clients. So it was like, I'm learning stuff, I guess, but I should have already known this like when I was in grade school, whatever. But yeah, so I kind of went to school because I was like, my brain was like not being stimulated. But now I'm sort of thinking about using sound as a methodology.
Yeah.
For ethnography-based projects. and
Oh,
stuff like that.
rad.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, my experience with the sound aspect is just like with WBEZ, and then of hearing about other kind of NPR member stations, and maybe Alison has some insight on this too, but I feel like the main difference I've seen is if you're a union shop or you're not a union shop, and if your technical people are union or if they're not. So some newsrooms like WBEZ, the reporters are the ones who are gathering all the sound, or producers, kind of, sometimes that word is used really flexibly, but they're the ones gathering the sound, they're the ones mixing, they're the ones doing all the compression work or adding music beds. And in other shops like KQED, the reporters give the recordings to the sound engineer, and they do all the mixing, they do all the EQ, they do all the stuff because they're unionized in a different way. So that's been the limited experience I have. I don't know how it works in commercial radio or other shops that do like documentary work. Alison, do you have knowledge of that?
No, not much. I mean, I do, it's true that the model in public radio is that you are responsible for collecting all your sound. But it's true, if you contribute to NPR, they also take all of your recordings and they do the mix. But I think that has to do with their standards to air as well. They don't want to rely on you or have to go do that back and forth. It's easier for them to do that in-house. But there is a whole other piece of it, which is when I started WBZ, the sound engineers were unionized, but the rest of us were not. And they managed the shows, so they ran all the shows and they were responsible for that. So actually like recording or engineering live sound and managing all of that. So that's another piece. And they interact with the show that way. So that, I guess that's the kind of outsourced model.
Yeah.
Within.
Yeah, but there's such a huge market right now as podcasts are, booming depending on which angle you look at them. But there's a real demand for people who know sound and know how to do it well and know how to tell stories with sound and how to think about it not just as like a means for information, but as a storytelling medium itself. So I feel like you're at a good moment for sound. For people who need experts in sound quality and mixing and engineering, and I'm sure music never has a...
And it just strikes me that, like, it's again that thing of, like, you are so much more capable than that job allowed you to be. You were in a really limited role, you were bored, but, like, if you were on a 3-person team creating a new show, like, I imagine you'd be wearing a ton of different hats, and a lot of your capacities would be used. So... yeah, I mean, that's capitalism and that's specialization, but it's nice when you start something new or you get in on the ground floor. I think and you have a skill, something that you're good at. So if somebody needs you for X reason, but little do they know, you also have A, B, and C to offer, so, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I want to go ahead.
No, go ahead, Margaret.
I just want to piggyback on that question and maybe have you talk a little bit about the trends that you're seeing, the kinds of requests you're getting, and the kinds of like needs out there that perhaps PhD students in the humanities. So like sound, I don't know, Ben, in your world, like what are journals and magazines asking for that you see come through your way, and Ellen also in your world.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I've been sitting here thinking about, so the things that they want, which are not what you want necessarily as a writer, is they want you to contribute to the web. And so there's a huge demand, this daily demand, like I don't know if anyone looks at like the New Yorker website, like so every day they're filling that up with 5 to 10 stories. And you can imagine that they're all about 1,000, 2,000 words and pretty good writers, serious people, and they're not paying very much money at all for that. And so there is this demand to do that. And there are many outlets. I think you could write, they might pay a couple $100, so you might, it's a lot of work. The same number of words somewhere else might pay, like I said, $4,000. And so it's interesting to think like you could use that to build up your reputation and to hone your skills and to develop an audience. In the same way like a YouTuber or, like online social media, you might build up a, following. And so like one of my friends is this guy, Jelani Cobb, who pretty much built he was an academic, he still is, but he was a popular writer for a little while before that. And he started writing for the New Yorker website and wrote a ton for them, and now is a writer for the magazine on staff. So you can sort of see how you build a connection, but it's it's a tough balance. Like how long can you do that where you're building like an online presence to sort of prove yourself? You have clips, but that's a route that I did not take for various reasons, but I see that as like an alternative way to sort of break in. And I think, if I was advising someone now or sort of even starting out now, it's a way to sort of reach out to big publications and to get your stuff out there. And also to learn basically like the trade.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I'm seeing a lot of people looking in, especially in media, everyone's freaked out about the industry collapsing, changing, evolving, dying, all of those things, and it's all happening simultaneously. So I think a lot of people are looking for consultants, and they're looking for someone who could give them a 10,000-foot view of whatever it is they're doing. And I'm not sure to what extent all of you in the room as academics and as PhD students and candidates have this desire of kind of systems thinking, but I think there's a huge need and a huge hunger and appetite for people who can see systems and figure out how to help them work better. So whether that's as a consultant, design thinking, who's heard of design thinking here? Okay, that's like kind of sweeping the nation slowly but surely. The Midwest always seems like, the last to get on board, but West Coast is like total design thinking. Silicon Valley is all about design thinking, and that's trickling as well. So I think if you have that skill set where you can be someone who's a mediator, who's a facilitator, who's a connector, who's kind of an interdisciplinary whiz on some level, I think that can be very high paying and that can be really lucrative. So even if it's taking a couple extra classes about how to be a facilitator or how to do consulting or how to do design thinking work, I think there's a lot of opportunity to freelance and do it at a rate that's pretty high because people are looking for those answers to huge systemic problems rather than just the particular kind of plug-in to this aspect of the beast we need to feed or the thing we need to do. So if you're interested in that kind of 10,000-foot view thinking, there's a lot of opportunity there.
The other thing that comes up for me to your question, Margarita, is like, you have to, especially as a musician, it's so weird. A couple years ago, I got a phone call from a singer-songwriter in Portland who was putting a show together that was going to go to BAM in Brooklyn and play at the MCA and like a very prestigious show. It was a 6-person show only, and all the musicians were going to be on stage the whole time. So you had to act, and you had to move, and you had to memorize all the music. And he was like, I need a string player who can do all these things in Chicago, and like I understand that like you're the person I should talk to. And it's so weird because like I never would have known that gig existed. Like so many jobs are never posted, so many roles are never, there was no application. So if you don't put yourself out there and make sure that people know what you do, even though it's weird, like especially as a classical musician, I was like, well, no one probably really cares that like I can play the ukulele a little bit, or like, yeah, I sing, but like I don't have a master's degree in singing, so I probably shouldn't put that on my website. Like no, like so it's weird. The little fringe things that you do are sometimes what makes you somebody's ideal candidate. So I guess I would just encourage everyone to make yourself discoverable for what you actually do. Because I have made the mistake of like hiding in a corner with my side stuff that I can't tell anyone about because it makes me not a serious artist. And that was the very thing that has opened doors to some really amazing opportunities that were tailor-made for me. So like opportunities exist that are tailor-made for you, but you have to, I don't make my mistake of like thinking there's something wrong with you because of your weird combinations of skills. You have to fly the flag a little bit. Yeah.
So this kind of goes into that. We went to Corel yesterday and we heard about branding. And so I'm wondering what you have done to brand yourself, especially when you have a wide variety of things that you do, and what are maybe some things that you wish you would have done earlier or that you found it been really useful?
It's hard to brand yourself when you're changing all the time. That's one thing that I feel. I mean, I'm a Pisces, so it's like never the same. It's different every day. So it's hard to brand yourself. Like, I've made a website, and then 6 months later, I'm like, well, I got to change this because, my priorities have changed. But this is such a hard question. Oh, anyone else? I feel like I have things to say, but have you branded yourself, Ben?
I've not been good at it. I mean, I think, like, so when you said about regrets, like, I probably should have had a website, my own website, much earlier. And sort of to, combine all my writing there, someone could go there, I'll link. There were a few places that, writing places that started up where sort of was collected, long form, and others sort of initially had a kind of like pay model where they're all there, but they disappeared. So I think probably that could have helped, but also, I mean, a little bit like you, like, the hustle, the work is happening so much that I also didn't have this other part of my brain where I was doing that. And I'm just not, and I know I've actually interviewed a bunch of people, like when I interview sort of like genius types, and I did this profile of this guy, Theaster Gates. Does anybody know him, this artist here? And he was describing that his mind works like files that you open on Windows. Like, you could just open one and close one and open another. And as he was saying, I could actually see it happening. Like, he could, like, social this, throw this party. I'm gonna have 400 people come to this artist festival. I'm opening up this arts bank. And it was, he could do it all. And like, I'm promoting myself, and like, that's why he's a genius. And I'm like just this, this. I'm working, yeoman. Like, I wish I had that other capacity to be like, I'm online presence. I'm like also blogging daily. I mean, I think like sort of doing that is really helpful, like that daily presence where you're out in the world. Both, like you were saying, that you've become discoverable. I don't know, the thing that we haven't really talked about, and maybe Alison touched on this a little bit, there's also this way, like, you're kind of, maybe you guys don't feel this way, but it's easy to feel fragile and like sort of like to lose yourself in kind of existential feelings, because like if you're not doing shit, like you don't exist. It's not like if you go to an office and you just have a nothing day, like you're like, well, I still got paid. Like I still work here. I'm still like the employee X who does this. But like if you have a week where you just don't get a lot done, you're just a guy who sat in a coffee shop. And like you're like, and maybe that's kind of male, and I'm a little bit older than you guys, like to feel like that sense of like wow, what the fuck, so like I've had some success, and like I think in the world of freelancing, people are like, oh, like he's had a cover story there, but like I often feel like it doesn't take much to sort of like plunge, and so that's a long way to say like also doing those kind of like daily hits where you're like, oh, see, it makes you feel like you exist in whatever realm that, like I did a story for The Reader a couple weeks ago, which is the local like free newspaper, and it was like, they had their Best of Chicago issue, and they had reached out to a bunch of writers and like, paid like $100, which I will probably never get. Like they're not going to send it to me, but it was like, it's true. But it was like, I wanted to. I'm writing a book, which is like a marathon, and like I just wanted to feel like I'm a writer, and like what does that mean? Like I better write something, and like I can I can forward it to my mom.
That's important. Like,
it looks like I have a couple follow-ups here.
I was going to jump in. I don't know if you wanted to weigh in on this, Jen, but suggest that we take a break for a little bit and then come back, and I'd love to talk more about this, but get into the nitty-gritty. So if you're just the guy in the coffee shop, like what does a day in the life look like, and how do you manage that? How do you organize what you spend time on, and money? Let's talk more about money and all of that.
Do you want to start with a day in the life of Ellen?
A day in my life. It's really funny. I was just telling, is it Doug? Yeah, Doug. I just got married, went on my honeymoon, and I'm moving to Washington, D.C. in a month. So my partner got a job. So I feel like I can't remember what my typical day is, but lately, I also like, this is such a tempting opportunity to talk about my ideal day, like what I wish what my ideal day would be is I would get up, I would like meditate, do some yoga, I would sing and like play my violin and like write for a while, then I would have like fruitful conversations with friends and collaborators, and I would rehearse for a couple of hours, and then I would be done working. That would probably be about it. And maybe play like a great show at night, right? Like show up to a concert hall at 7:30 and, play some really fabulous piece and receive, accolades. That would be like my ideal day. But I think typically I'm getting up and looking at my phone and my computer too soon. Earlier than they say you should for your sanity. And, and then there was the fact that for the last year I was getting up and I was working 20 hours a week at an office. So I'm going to talk about that. I would get up really early, cram in all the work I wanted to do, like play my violin. Maybe I have a concert coming up, so there's like 2 pieces of music on my stand. I'm rehearsing one in 2 days and one in 5 days. So the one in 2 days is like way more pressing. I'm penciling in bowings and fingerings. I'm listening to recordings, trying to make sure that I'm prepared, because when I show up to the first rehearsal, I have to be ready to go. The other one I might be working at a little bit more slowly. I might have a client call with, someone who I'm working for, say the people I do email marketing for. Talking about what's going to go in the next e-blast, and then it would be 11 a.m. and I would go an hour on the train downtown, be there from 12 to 5, and then come home and probably try to practice some more. So I was squeezing it in. And when I was there 9 to 5, I was getting up at 5 because I missed playing my violin so much. So that was my first indication that I wasn't going to stay at that job. But yeah, that's part of it. But now I'm trying to spend enough time on my clients, especially the ones who are paying me, really well, and really make them feel like they're my top priority. So I'm kind of getting in touch with them each morning. And then I'm playing my violin, I'm doing a bit of writing. I think that's kind of about it. But like I said, I'm a little out of touch with what my typical day is because there's a lot of change in my life right now.
You were describing the freelancer before who, maybe I'll work Tuesdays and Thursdays. Like
Yeah.
To me, that sounds terrible.
Yeah.
Like one, and what you were describing, like, part of knowing I could do this is like I'm not just self-motivated, but if I'm not working, I feel awful. And so like I know that I don't need the structure of like an office or a boss to like get stuff done. Like if I'm not working, if it's not a productive day, I just feel bad. And so when you do have a day that that is such a dread that's a motivation. So it varies for me depending on what work I have. If I have an assignment, there might be interviews, lots of phone interviews, or like if I'm out reporting, dividing up the day with that and writing. Some days it's just writing, and it's very solitary and like, part of it at home, part of it going, to a library or to a coffee shop. I mean, just anywhere like to keep it going. There's nothing like that exciting about the day in that way. It's like just, writing is kind of plodding work. It's like, hiking, like one step in front of another. And like to just get that done, you just need chunks of time and you need to sit there and you need to do it. And there's more exciting parts, like going out reporting, like, you're flying somewhere, you're meeting people, you're collecting all your notes. But those are sort of the spikes in between the valleys where you're just like really getting it done. I mean, that's, I don't know if there's more to say than that.
Yeah, I guess my running a company life was, my rule was pants on by 10. So it's like no matter what, I just needed to have clothes on. I needed to be showered even if I was staying in my house working. And for the most part, I've always had a space where I've worked from and slept, like my bed was like 10 feet away from where I was working, which I've read studies is not the healthiest scenario to have. So I did have my coffee shops I would go to, or friends I would like pair work with. We would just be next to each other to help motivate and stop to chat every so often. But I also, like, my weekends and my weekdays just blended in. They were all the same. I'd work on the weekends. I'd work on the weeknights. I'd take off at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday and go take a class and then go back. So there was flexibility that was both liberating but then sometimes suffocating because you're just like, I could do anything right now. What should I do? But now that I'm running a company, it's like more like pants on by 6:30. Walk the dog by 7, get to work by 8:30, start typing emails. Like my entire day is chunked out. The calendar is a little scary. Like after here, I know what I'm doing every hour of pretty much every day until August. So like that can also be suffocating and terrible, but then I try to give myself an hour between 10 and 11 at night to do whatever I'd like.
Do you have an assistant or a scheduler?
I'm working on getting one. Yeah, so I use a lot of free tools. We had an assistant and scheduler, and they got a different job that was full-time because we couldn't do full-time. But I use a lot of like free tools, like Calendly is a great tool to have people grab time in your day so you don't have to schedule and have 15 emails about what time and when. So I'm using a lot of like efficiency tools. I use Slack a lot. I don't know if you guys use Slack, but that's like the lifeblood of this business that I run. So we're always on Slack, sending messages to one another, who's doing what, who's doing this, who's doing that. And then I spend most of my time right now trying to sell this concept of Harkin to other newsrooms, and then trying to figure out how to run a company and how to manage, and also how to how to like do things like payroll and Gusto and whatnot.
Keep talking.
Oh, okay.
I'll Google them and figure out what this, because sometimes the spellings are funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you keep going.
Okay, all right, no worries. So a lot of it is figuring out, because I'm our chief salesperson right now, and I don't really like selling things, so that's a problem. So trying to figure out how do I grow a company, how do we make enough money, do we need to raise more investment, who do we raise investment from, what kind of company are we building, what's our culture, how do our meetings go, what are our operational systems, are we using Google Docs for this, or are we using Trello, are we using GitHub, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of it is just like air traffic controller kind of work for lots of different things at any given time. But the thing I've recognized in myself, and I think probably everyone has this to some degree, is the rhythm of your week, and trying to like go with the flow of the rhythm of your week rather than just like jam things in when you want to. So I know, for instance, when I want to write and when I need space to think, I can't do it on a weekday. I just can't. So I need to block out writing times on Sundays. That's like the best time for me. To do planning stuff, Mondays are the best, and Fridays. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are like the meat of the week where I need to do more like straight up meetings and getting stuff done and executing. So just knowing kind of like the rhythm, the circadian rhythm of your life, and then the rhythm of the week has been really helpful to like have each thing have its place in time. Like I'm not going to do a planning meeting on a Wednesday. That sounds insane to me now. Whereas before, it didn't matter.
Well, I mean, neither of you guys have children?
No.
I was going to ask you this.
So like listening to you guys, I'm like, man, the thing I didn't say is that like, at 3:30 you turn into a pumpkin. And like, it's over. Like, so in terms of blocking out time, you're like, that's, it's got to happen here because at this point, it's over. Like, so I have 2 kids and there's this chunk of time. But if you're also, the other thing I didn't say, which is important, I think, for my own path, is like I have a spouse, a wife who isn't a freelancer, and that's made things, much better and easier. Like, I don't, the $2,000 in the bank account, like there's a kind of stability when things aren't happening that I have. And so I know that's a benefit. But also you're the one who's going to do, all the things if like, the kid is sick or something, like, because you don't have an office job. But like that thing also, these 2 children mean that, your time in these moments are really precious. And so because, not only for this, afternoon, but then you're going to be exhausted after, and it's going to be harder to do like a night shift of work. So,
So that changed once you how old are your kids?
11 and 8. Yeah.
And like, how has your like writing career?
No, it's funny. I mean, like
been parallel to like
you imagine like listening, like, man, if I didn't have children, the stuff I would do. Like gym for 6 hours, write for 8, go out and party. Like it sounds like you could do, but mostly like I didn't do shit back then. It was just like God.
Right.
Imagine like something,
right.
but
right.
But now looking back, it's like the people at the college you said were 28 if they could be brought back now.
Yeah.
Like use your time, take advantage of it. Man, don't slip.
Oh, that's awesome.
This is kind of backtracking a little bit, but also sort of related. Can I ask about, it seems like the model of making your networks that allow you to freelance for you were internships / like moving a lot, which part, I'm already almost 30 and I'm married. It's part of the reason why there are many other reasons, but part of the reason I don't want to be an academic is because I don't want to have to move to another country for like 3 months every year. And so I don't want to just like pick up and move or, randomly. So how do people make networks and freelancing that don't involve necessarily moving someplace for an unpaid internship or...
I feel like it is so much about, to me, it's not a lot of people. For me, like, network is about, like, quality over quantity. So, like, for me as a musician, like, we don't do much alone. It's in groups. And so I feel like sometimes there's that person that you meet that you, like, really connect with. You love their work. Like, you hear about their dissertation project and you're, like, ecstatic. And, like, there's kind of some magic in those connections. And I'm about to move after being here for 8 years. And being a freelance musician is all about your butt being in the chair, showing your face, showing up to concerts. So that's very scary to relocate. Relocation is not a plus for my line of work. It's bad. But I know that, like, all over the country are kind of these, like, soulmates who I'm going to work with sort of for the rest of my life just because we're so closely bonded. So that's how I think about networks. Obviously, I'm not very, like, I don't sound very strategic or power-oriented right now because I'm not. But for me, the relationships, like, that sustain my work, that's my network. So it's not very, I don't know. So that's what keeps me going, is just those really close relationships with someone whose work I really connect to. Then I think you're going to be okay.
Yeah, and I think networks-wise, depending on the kind of work you're doing, it might make sense where you need it to be geographically specific versus topic specific versus kind of frame of mind specific or whatnot. So I feel like when I was a reporter here in Chicago, my network, the most important thing was my Chicago network. Who were the sources I knew? Who were the movers and shakers? Who was doing other stories? Who were reporters? And now that I'm doing a company that doesn't just serve Chicago, we have a couple clients here, my network has become like global, where I'm thinking of who's the thought leader who's talking about this thing, who's the person who's doing this. And the place where I feel like I make the most connections and congregate is at conferences. For better or for worse, sometimes conferences are like, shoot me, they're just terrible or not well run, or they just, there's good ones and there's bad ones depending on what you're looking for, but that can be a really fruitful place to like have a space where you're all pollinating and then your seeds scatter whatever, throughout the world, and you can pick up with that person and say, hey, remember we had coffee at this thing 2 months ago, I'd love to talk about X, Y, or Z. So I feel like those are good places to find your tribe if there are conferences for what you're interested in.
I think there were some more questions, even from before the break, but you've had your hand up for.
Oh, I had a similar question, is how do you build community as a freelancer?
Yeah. Yeah, it can be lonely, and I love your idea of the pair work. That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
But like if you don't have children and your day is, alarmingly wide open, I think it is important to like structure it depends on your personality, but for me it's very important to structure some time with other humans.
Yeah.
And so many writers get that just from a coffee shop. You're like, okay, I'm in my pack, I feel reassured by the presence of other like warm bodies. So just knowing what your needs are in that regard, I guess.
Yeah, I was just, along the lines of building community, I was just wondering, as freelancers, I feel like there can be, sometimes the job can be so thankless. So like, how do you measure impact, where you kind of find the motivation to get up again and look for another gig, or, and wait for it to come to you? Like, how do you measure that? I mean, as instructors, you have to sit there and you have to like, teach all these wonderful things that you're passionate about, and it's just like, there's, nobody's paying attention, or they're just walking out of the room. And, I worked at a music festival, and we used to get musicians to just be the welcoming musicians, right, in DC. And people just walk by, nobody stops. And so, like, this question of, like, just finding the motivation to keep going, and I feel like that is directly tied to the impact you make. So just how do you do that? How do you measure it?
I don't know, some of that, what you're describing is being a professional, right? Like, I'm paid to do this job where I'm going to sit and play music here in a position where people are just going to walk by, but I understand that that's the job. And that's, that's like lowering your sort of magical expectations of artist or whatever a little bit, but like just like I remember sort of some of the early gigs I got writing, and I was like, oh, I'm a professional writer, meaning I don't inherently care about this topic, but I'm going to write the hell out of this story. But that's just being like there was something exciting about that in itself, but it was far from art or like great, right? It wasn't something that I would have ever dreamed of wanting to do. So.
I feel like there's kind of the intrinsic and the extrinsic rewards that you can look at of if you can figure out the thing that you're doing, can I, is this something I'm learning from? Is this something that's edifying in some way? Or am I meeting people? Even if it's not the thing that I'm used to, like what are the positives I can draw from this? So, and then also, do you have cheerleaders in your life? People that you can call on and say, hey, I'm feeling bummed, and they can remind you like, you're amazing. Look what you've done before. Look who you are to people. Like can kind of reflect back to you and be a mirror. I think that's super important, whether that's family or friends or a stranger or a therapist, whoever that may be, like someone who can reflect back to you in those moments. Also, a friend of mine has like a rainy day email or like a rainy day folder in her email of just like nice things people have written to her. And every so often when she needs it, she just pops that open and she's like, oh my God, I wrote a story that like created funding for this school, or I did this thing that did that, just to remind yourself of like, the small stuff does matter, and you might not know immediately what the effect was for it, but it's like, I'm with Ben where if I'm not productive, I feel like I don't exist in the world. So that's like the motivator for me, but having those extrinsic and intrinsic like mix of rewards can be really helpful.
So you, like listening to you have like, I could hear all this language of like, motivation, and like you've thought this through in a way you're actually articulating it in a different way than I think maybe we are. And is that post starting a company? Like, have you read a lot about this, or like you've developed your own sort of language to describe it?
I have my bedroom's just full of successories.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
You know what I mean, though? Like
yeah, eagles. No. Wow.
Eagles.
Yeah. No. That's a good question. I don't know how it's happened. I mean, I've read some business books before, but they're all like, how to get revenue,
Yeah.
like more kind of tactical
Do you
things.
read about psychology a lot?
I think I'm just interested. Like I love
Interested in
like,
it. Mhm.
Invisibilia. I love, like all these things that are about human behavior and
Yeah.
whatnot. And then I also like,
Are you presenting your company? I mean, imagine so like
Yeah.
That's a different kind of public
Yes.
way to immediate feedback of like trying to convince people and
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of persuading that has to happen, which
so
is
your
really
language becomes
uncomfortable.
honed and you're
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, just putting yourself out there for better or worse. Like you get beat up, but then you learn a better answer to the question, or you learn what they were looking for and how to give it to them in a different way, I think. Yeah.
I see two of you. I don't know who wants to go first.
Okay, I have a money question.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Thank you guys for being so frank and willing to talk about this stuff. It's a two-part question. Number one is I wonder if each of you could estimate in the past year or in an average year how many places are paying you to make up your yearly salary. And then the second question is, how do you kind of walk that tightrope of assessing whether or not the fee you're being offered is fair to you, negotiating for a higher fee, or setting your own rate for kind of services you provide?
Can I add my money question?
Yeah.
How much, what's the deal with taxes? Because I feel like that's the scariest. Yeah. And health insurance. Yeah.
and health insurance. Yeah. Why don't you throw retirement in there too?
Yeah. Throw retirement in there. Well,
Knock us out.
I'm just going to log into Chase. Just 1 second. No.
Yeah.
For me, I think I probably get, this is tied to taxes, because you know how many people paid you when your 1099s come in. So it was probably like 10. But like 2 of those were like a lot, right? Like 2 of those were like, the publication I wrote for every month that gave me a stipend every month of like $800, right? And so they paid me 12 times, and so that's like a 10 grand, 1099. If I'm smart, I set aside 20% of that in a fund that I have called taxes. And then but I should be paying quarterly, but I'm not. Anyway.
The fees aren't that bad, though, if you don't pay quarterly.
Yeah, it's not that
So,
bad if you
yeah.
don't pay quarterly. So I try to self-discipline in terms of taxes, and I set aside 20% of anybody who 1099s me. I've also weirdly been saving for retirement since I was 23, and I've never had a full-time job. But somewhere I was like on some finance blog that was like, you should put some money in here. So I've been putting $100 a month in an account since I was like really little. And now I can do more than I could do then, but not much more.
That's great.
Yeah, I feel so lucky that I like had that thought, because it could have easily gone the other way where I didn't have that thought, because they say you should just automate it, which I did when I was much younger. But so yeah, like 10 places paid me. What about you guys?
I think, so about negotiating, I think for what I do, it's more set, like a magazine has a rate. And you could sort of, the range, you can't push that much, but a little bit. And you could ask for a raise and, we'll give you an extra 25 cents a word, which is, if you write 6,000 words, equals something. I think before I had a book, it was like about 10 different places a year. I'd probably write 10 things a year. With a book, it's fewer because I got a chunk of money from the book ahead, and that was like 4 years ago, and I haven't seen a cent, but I will at some point when I turned it in at the end of this year. So that's like, when you think about how much it is, that's not very much, but it's spread out, and hopefully, and the other thing with taxes, once you're freelance, like, everything is a write-off too. Like it's like because you're living life, and that's part of it. So you sort of have to think in those terms too, like accumulating all the things you do that are going to be part of your taxes, because you're all your travel, like sort of all your entertainment is sort of feeding this kind of thing.
Yeah, like Netflix you can write off,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like all these.
Your cable bill.
Oh,
Yeah.
damn, I need to write off Netflix.
Yeah, yeah, totally. In terms of 1099s and payment, it's a little bit different. So now that I have a company, I think we have about 32 investors, so we raised about $1 million in investment, and then which like to me at the time was like, oh my god, we have so much money. And now that I'm running a business and employing 9 people, I'm like, holy shit, we did not raise enough money. So it's like, again, that weird like money changes what it means. But then I'll typically have like 7 or 8 1099s just from other things in life over the course of the year. I did, just to be perfectly honest, like last year I could only pay myself, because we were first starting this company, $20,000. That was as much as I made last year, even though I had raised almost $500,000, because I just needed to pay other people who could do things that I couldn't. I slept on air mattresses in garages in San Francisco during this accelerator program, so I didn't have to pay my mortgage here and San Francisco rent, which is insane. So again, it's kind of like that appetite or threshold for risk. I was like, peanut butter sandwiches, let's do this. 3 months. Like it was bare bones, but now I can pay myself like 60, which feels so much better. But like if I were like now, I would never work for someone else for 60.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Like just doing that, I'm like, oh, no way. But I'll pay myself 60. Like that's okay. But I couldn't put money away for retirement last year. I couldn't do a lot of things just because I wasn't in that state of flow. But it's kind of like the aggregated risk over time is what you can consider. If you can have a lean year, you need to know next year is going to be bigger. The other thing I was just thinking of right now that you could potentially apply, that we're trying to figure out all the time, how do we sell this approach to newsrooms? And I think it can apply to freelancers, is thinking about like, we need to come at it from this perspective of what's your pain point? What are the things you as an organization are trying to figure out? And then how can I bring value to that and prove that I gave you value for that? So if you're a freelancer, you could think of yourself of like, how do I pitch myself to the publication? But I think it could be much more effective, or pitch yourself to whatever the thing is. It could be having a conversation with them of like, what are you struggling with? Like interviewing them. What are your problems? What are the things you can't solve that you need help with? And then coming back to them a week or two later and saying, here's what I can offer you. Because then they can take that to their boss and say, this is how this person's going to help us solve our problem. So if you like flip the script a little bit, instead of like, here's what I have to offer you, ask them what they need and then see how you can help them. I think that might be a worthwhile approach.
Yeah.
I have a question about the accelerator program that you decided on, or how that process happened for you.
Yeah.
If you don't mind talking.
No, totally. So I quit WBEZ. I'd raised $100,000 to kind of to be a bridge for the next year, because I had no idea what the scalable version of Curious City this thing was. I didn't know if I was going to end up $100,000 and produce a 50-page PDF to send around to people. I didn't know what we were going to make. So that was just my, like, it wasn't quite fuck you money, but it was like, I can take a little time and figure it out money, and figure out how to get more money. And so I was really lucky that at the same time I was quitting, I was applying to this accelerator program called Matter in San Francisco, and it's really specifically geared toward early stage media startups. So media could be, you're a company that's helping to have journalists automate FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, or you're a media company helping to tell really detailed stories on a single subject. It was very varied. But long story short, I got the call that I got in after a very grueling kind of application process right after I quit. So in January, I learned I was moving to San Francisco 3 weeks later. And so I packed up, I moved, I found a CTO, a chief technology officer, and a co-founder. I found a developer, and we started this program. It was a 20-week-long program, and it was all about design thinking applied to businesses. So it's like this agile approach where you just like make little incremental changes, you test them. You make more incremental changes, you test them. And so it was a really valuable program. And through the course of those 20 weeks, we figured out to some extent what's our business model, how are we making money, what's the technology component, what do we need to build, how do we find customers. So it was a really amazing timing. I think otherwise I would have had $100,000 and been sitting in my home office just like freaking out every day that I have no idea what to do. So it created a lot of structure for me, which was really helpful. But then I had to move to San Francisco, and my husband lived in Chicago, and then he moved out to San Francisco so that he could get a job. He's a permalancer, which is a fun word if you guys don't know that one. It's like a freelancer, but where you're working on project-to-project bases that are like a year or two in timeline. So you're freelancing, but you have these like bigger lily pads to jump to. So he's a documentary filmmaker, so he was working on a film out there. And then now he lives in LA this year, so I live here. I see him once a month, or he comes here once a month. So it's kind of a messy lifestyle. But the accelerator program was really good, and I recommend if you do have an idea for a company or you have the entrepreneurial bug, there's so many of them out there. But everyone is just looking for how can I take a chance on you without too much risk. So you need to have something to show like before you go in there. Yeah.
I have a kind of specific question for you, Ben. You talked earlier about writing like really short things for not a ton of money for different places, and that being sort of a valuable way to get yourself out there. I've done a couple of things like that, but only like if I'm approached. And so I was wondering if you could talk through the logistics of like approaching a paper or a magazine and saying like, I have this idea, like pay me to write something short, or I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I was saying before about ideas being currency. I mean, so that reaching out, like somehow you've developed the idea enough that it sounds really good, and like, you've come up, whatever, you have an expertise, right? And so you have, I mean, right, like I know you do. I mean, like, so and so figuring that out, how to present that, and presenting it, I mean, guys are gonna have a pitch, talk about pitches later, but like, certainly for me, like working at Harper's Magazine from the other end, where we would have these pitch meetings, and you would sit in a meeting, and there were like 12 pitches would come in, and everyone would shit on them, and you'd be like, man, I thought that was pretty good, But then you would just hear these editors who had been there for years, and they just like were jaded in this way, and like not good enough for us, and you're like, well, it made you think like, why didn't that capture that attention, or why did that one did, and so I mean. I've seen, over the years now, hundreds and hundreds of those kinds of pitches, because we did that every month, and there were usually a dozen of them, and then you would also try to get them, and I've written, 50 of them also. So there's certainly a kind of craft to it. I mean, of like, catching someone's attention, showing off your writing, showing off the idea, also being concise. And so, I mean, I think. Figuring out also who to contact, which is like, that is just like the most logistical thing. Like, so sometimes there's stuff on a website for, say, a magazine or a web magazine. Other times, like, you use your connections to figure out to get an email. Like, that is a big deal. Like, so, and that's where the thing like the internship comes in. But truthfully, I'm not saying write me, but like, you're like, hey, I saw you at this talk the other day. Do you still have that connection to someone at the New York Mag? You know, like those are the kind of things that you got to do. And like, because you're just looking for an email to send somebody, you know, like that other person could decide yes or no, but you at least want someone to decide, rather than sort of that kind of entry point. Yeah, and then, I mean, generally, I believe like you send it to one place and you wait for a reply or like a decent amount of time and then you start sending out rather than sort of sending out, you know, it's like asking someone on a date or something, like at least like find out that Saturday night, whatever, you know, and so, that's probably all pre-Tinder or whatever, like that's so behind the times, like that's not how it works, I know, but, yeah, so I think, you know, that cover letter, but also just, you know, it's about ideas. I mean, you just got to catch somebody with the way that something feels fresh. I mean, like, and things just come up, right? I mean, you know, whatever it is, like, you've seen something and you want to present it in a way that others haven't grasped.
Yeah, great, thank you.
And just to piggyback on that real quick, one of the things that that they taught in this accelerator program that I've like such an evangelist for now is the art of the forwardable email. So when you write an email to, like, let's say a Ben or a theoretical person who you want to have connect you to someone else, is figuring out in that email, how do you very quickly establish who you are, you know, why they should pay attention to you, what you're specifically looking for from them, and how long you're asking them of their time. Because at the end of the day, like, time is currency as well. So if you're just kind of like, hey, I'd just love to pick your brain, people who are super busy are like, I don't have time to pick my brain. Like, what do you want specifically? And I'll give it to you, or I'll at least be able to make that decision. So being able to write those emails that then Ben or someone could forward directly to the person you need, and then they can take it away from there, and you're not asking too much. So I think forwardable emails are like a really
You mean
awesome thing.
so that there was nothing that I would have to add to it because it's self-contained?
Exactly. Or the thing you would have to add is you could then create a nice little paragraph of saying, I met so-and-so, they're really great, here's what I know, but you don't then have to figure out, how do I couch what this person is looking for? Because that's like cognitively kind of unkind.
Yeah, that's work.
You know, that's work that then you have to do. So if you can give him everything he needs, or give that person everything they need to just then write a glowing few sentences about why they should pay attention to you, then it's a good use of everyone's time. That's a thing I've been thinking about a lot. I heard on a podcast called Note to Self, but about cognitive kindness and about thinking about how can you do more work than someone else so that they can just easily say yes or no to what you're asking for. So you've probably all had the email chain of 15 friends being like, let's all get together. Where should we go? I don't care. What about you? I don't know. What about this time? And it's just like, oh my God, will someone just put something we can decide on? So like you do the cognitively kind thing by saying like, how about 6 o'clock at Mario's? And if anyone has another idea, throw it out there, but at least not everyone has to be in this whirlwind.
You know, I was also thinking about the kind of the sort of biases or the prejudices that a place like, you know, a magazine would have that sort of, you know, thinks that itself of kind of literary. And like, I mean, in terms of like, if an academic writes them, or even sort of like a daily newspaper person writes them, they think that they don't speak the same language immediately. Like, oh, I'm gonna have to rewrite this. That's like the thought that happens at that magazine, just letting you know. And so that's obviously, there are many academics and daily writers and others that are fantastic, but, you know, so that general feel. So I think just saying, you know, I'm a PhD student in this, which is prestigious in some worlds, you know, the be all and end all, like that doesn't necessarily translate immediately, because it's like, can that person, you know, write concisely and tell a story for a popular audience? You know, they're sort of trained not to. You know, like you're like couching it in, you know, the sort of discourse and the discipline you're in. And so I think that's, you know, to maybe think about that as what you lead with, and also how you present yourself. I mean, I think that's probably important. I think I've been part of like groups in different cities in Nashville and others where like academic writers were like looking to explore how to write more for a popular audience. So we would sort of have these workshops, and like, you know, that sense, that desire to write differently, and also that feeling like knowing that they weren't writing in those ways, that they've sort of been, you know, even after 30 years for some of them, of like they've been sort of hardened into a different way.
Thank you, all of you, for being here with us. I do have kind of a follow-up pitch question. I'm just wondering if, if you're pitching a more long-form story, obviously there's more investment there than like if you're pitching a short story for like, a daily digital.
Yeah. Especially once you're asking someone to send you somewhere, you're asking them to say, trust me, front several, a couple $1,000s to send me somewhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, in that scenario, in the pitch, does it make sense to outline, like, obviously you have to sell the idea, but then does it also make sense to be like, I've done like X amount of research to establish part of the story already, and I have this amount to do, or like, is it worthwhile to communicate that, or is it really just about selling the story?
I think in a subtle way to do that, the first part that you said. Like, I think if it's too detailed in that way, it sounds kind of awkward. Like, it's almost like commercial in some way. So that should emerge, like how much you know, but also sort of a sense of like you're building anticipation of what's to come without it being defined yet. But it's showing like a sense of the whole of like where this could go. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example. Do you guys know who Tay Zonde is from Chocolate Rain? Is this before you? This is like internet age. Like, if you were internet alive in 2002, you would know who this is, but if not, sorry. So like, this is like one of the first big viral things. This guy, he looked like he was about 9, but he had a deep voice and he sang Chocolate Rain. This was like the big, 8 million hits, which then was enormous. So one day I was sitting around, I was like, man, what's Tay Zonde doing? Like, what is this kid doing? And it turned out that he was still making YouTube videos, but nothing, no blockbuster videos. It was just like this kind of like middle class YouTube existence. And I was like, oh, that's actually way more interesting than just like, what's he doing? Like, that all these people moved to LA and they're just like working their asses off. And they're like making $60,000 from the ad feeds, and that's the life. They're not going to make it as superstars, and so I pitched that story, and it was like, the idea of like, I hadn't been out there. I think I interviewed him once on the phone, and I was like, I'm gonna write about Tay Zonde, and I open with his thing about describing Chocolate Rain, just like I did when it came out in 2001, 2002, and like what's he doing now, and then this idea of sort of this middle class kind of YouTube star, presenting ideas of like, and I'm gonna talk to all these other guys, like I'm gonna go interview. They all live there, so I'm gonna go to this studio, and I just sort of looked up like these places that I thought would be interesting. Maybe in the end I wouldn't go to them. But it was sort of like I could conceive of like how this would fill out a story. I'm going to get this whole universe of a place. And that's just sort of, using, a kind of storytelling and imagining the ideal story. And, but also what's gettable. And so, that's how you write it up. I didn't have to contact, ensure that that was all going to take place ahead of time.
So my question is about investors and how you're able to get investors. I think your talk talks a lot about the storytelling and being able to pitch these ideas. But so we had an activity in here where we had to sit across from each other, and one of us had like $500,000 or something, right? And so it was scary because we didn't have the money, but like I don't know. So my question is, how when you go to somebody and you're asking for $500,000. What are you saying to them? I mean, you're telling them a story, but the story has to be really good for $500,000. I wasn't so good at it, so I'm just trying to figure out what you're doing.
Yeah, the pitching of investors has been one of the most terrifying and uncomfortable, but also like helpful things to learn how to do. And I can't say I'm an expert at it, but I got enough to give me a life preserver till the next time I have to do it, if I have to do it. But there's a whole art to it, and there's an art to figuring out, like, I think it took me too long to go from the like, well, who am I looking for, versus the like, anyone give me money, please, please. Like, it really does they can smell desperation, just like anyone can, where you come into the room and if you have an attitude of like, we're building something really special and, you know, we're open to the idea of you contributing to us versus like, please give us money, like it just feels different and they can tell. It's like they get hungry for like, oh my God, you're confident. Why are you confident? What are you building? Why, you know, like it's again, like psych, you know, of trying to figure out, and can you feel that authentically? Like you never want to do that on its own. It's gonna, that's a short-term game. But we just practiced our butts off in this accelerator program we were in. Every 4 weeks we had to pitch however much we knew about our company in 7 minutes, and there was a timer, and it was embarrassing if it went off when you were still talking because you were supposed to be like 2 time, if not a little early. And there were just a group of very accomplished people in there ready to tear you apart. But it
sounds terrible.
It was terrible. It was terrible, but it was so helpful because then you got less afraid every time of just being like, the saying that they had in this accelerator program was feedback is a gift. It's not a demand for change. So like if someone says, well, I think your company should do X, Y, and Z, you could be like, well, thank you. That's good for me to consider, but I don't have to do that. Like you can still have your own North Star. And so I think part of it for us was figuring out who are the kinds of investors we're looking for, what is their profile, what do they care about, besides having money, which obviously we need to have people with money. We were looking for that extra 2 or 3 layer thing of like, why are you investing in me? What do you care about? Do you care about making a return? Do you care about supporting women-led companies? Do you care about democratizing media? Do you care about more diverse story ideas coming into the pipeline? Like trying to find those people who had those qualifications, because you can get money anywhere, but it's never free. The people who give you the money, if they have different expectations and they just see a price tag on your head and not something more meaningful, they're going to be calling you saying, where's my money? How come you're not doing this deal? How come you're not going this direction? So I think a lot of times it's about matchmaking and finding those people who have the kind of money or the energy behind that money that is the same energy that you're trying to bring into the world. Because I've seen so many companies and even friends companies who, you know, were alive and well and beautiful and everyone was so excited about it, and they took money from an investor who had a lot of power over their company. Like they gave too much of their company up for that money, and so they had to go a different direction. It remains to be seen whether or not we took the right route and we're taking the right kind of money. Right now we feel like we're okay, but we might have to take more money, and it's hard to figure out what kind of money to take. But it's, yeah, one of these weird, again, mind flips of like, if someone wants to give me money, sure, let's do it, to the like, no, you need to be super selective if you are open to taking money, because they're buying a piece of like your soul, basically.
What was the, there was a radio guy a couple years ago who had an idea.
Alex Bloomberg?
Yeah. So I mean, I remember listening to that, and
Yeah.
like, you get to live it with him. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know, it seemed useful. to
It
hear.
is so useful. So
Yeah.
there's a great podcast called Startup. If you haven't listened to it, they're in season 3 right now. But it's about them trying to start a company and going through that horrible learning curve of figuring out how to pitch. And he's an extremely intelligent, wonderful, charismatic guy, and you're hearing him just like stuttering and
Gravel.
and like
He's
just
terrible.
groveling
Yeah.
and figuring out
Yeah.
what to do. So I mean, that was really helpful to listen
Yeah.
to as we were doing it. They're like, you know, a year ahead of us in terms of their sophistication, how much money they've raised. They've raised so much money, but yeah, at a price.
Right.
But that's there are a lot of podcasts for startup stuff.
Well, I feel like both of you guys have like, it's funny because you were talking about the pitch thing, and then Ben was like, that sounds horrible, but it also sounds just like the room where you guys were shitting on everyone's pitches at Harper's. Like it's sort of,
Except that person is, no
they're
one
not
is there.
there. Oh my
Yeah.
God, they're not there. I know,
Yeah.
but that's the thing. And I couldn't help but think that it was so, how crucial it was that you got to see so many pitches come in, and
Yes.
you saw all your colleagues pitching. You're like, oh, I see how she's messing up. I see that this is not working. And I think in so many environments, like we kind of avoid feedback. We feel fragile. Like feedback is so crucial. Or how many times have you gone to a colloquium? There's like 3 polite questions, and then everybody goes to the bar and like says what they really think. And it happens in music too. It's like, oh, I really liked your show, and then you go to the bar and you're like, what are they thinking? You know? And there's never that opportunity to actually be frank with each other about, and to come from like such a good place. So I love that you said that feedback is it. I mean, if you have a good relationship with an editor that you trust, who makes your work better,
Yeah.
then you're so much better the next pitch, because like, well, I remember my editor Molly, like she always had this problem with my pitches. She was always, I never really showed her like how this was going to land with like our audience. And so you just learn, and if you avoid feedback, it's like death
Totally.
And you know, someone asked about a community earlier, like to have a community where you're like, hey, can you send me a couple of your successful pitches, or like, I mean, those kinds of things. I mean, I had to write a book proposal, which is like this genre unto itself, or like, you know, tell me what you think chapter 12 is going to be. You write this thing, which is totally like, you know, speculative. And so several friends sent me their book proposals, and I was like, oh, okay, I could kind of figure it out that way. But without that,
you would have been
yeah,
kind of
just
lost.
been like, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And the last thing I'd add is just like not taking it personally. Like the feedback, it's so hard to not take it personally, especially when they're like, you smile too much, or, you know, like, or whatever it is. When it feels very personal and you're like, but I think just thinking about their spirit is they want to see you succeed, and you have to map between what their version of your success looks like. Is it in line with what you think your version is? And if it's not, then like disregard it. But if you think that they're coming from it with the spirit of like trying to help you in a way, like take it to mind, but don't take it to heart, I guess.
I think that's what I just want to say about really fast. I think that's really good advice, because a lot of us were over here snickering because feedback is all we get in our programs, and it's usually very critical. And so I think it's important to like get feedback from different people and different audiences, because my advisor may think that my pitch is like great, but then I go to talk to people in the community and they're like, "What are you talking about?" So like, it's good. I hear you. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's true. And true of being a musician too. You meet with your teacher every week, play for her or him, hear their comments, and leave. It's, you know, and it can be kind of brutal. But brutal's not necessarily always good. I mean, a couple of these clients that I have who I'm like working with their dissertation documents is like their advisor is not hands-on enough, or they're not getting the feedback they need from their advisor. So you're so right. It has to be a diverse group, because just because they're your advisor doesn't mean they're necessarily going to help in every way that you need. So yeah, you need a good team for sure. Yeah.
Just on that same topic of seeing examples, I'm just going to throw this out. There's something called a pitch database with the Open Notebook. So if you want to pitch a magazine story or something, they've got examples from like the New Yorker and Ars Technica and the New York Times.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, the Open Notebook.
I love that.
That's rad.
I'm gonna borrow Margarita's question from a couple of days ago, and just, would you guys give us like an example of a pitch that you guys have done that has been successful? Just, you know, from your experience and all the pitches that you've obviously made.
I have one that involves WBEZ. My string trio was doing a show that was like a mixed music and theater piece. And our cellist, Sarah, was so good at this. She would reach out to anyone. She'd just be like, I'll just send them a pitch. Actually, it's a little different. Well, in this case, it's like sort of a press release. If you're a performer, you know, you're going more in that direction. Or you have a book out, right? Then it becomes like your press release. And she wrote to Tony Sarabia, and she was like, we were like, Tony Sarabia is famous, because he's like on the, you know, like a reporter on WBEZ that you would listen to like every day. We're like, he's not going to pay attention, like Sarah, whatever. And then like immediately he's like, I'd love to have you on the show. I love to hear your music. Here's my cell, you know? And we were like, oh my God, we're going to meet Tony Sarabia, like minor Chicago celebrity, you know? So I guess that's just a story of like, don't skip someone because you think, you know, they won't care. Some of cultivating, as a performer, cultivating relationships with press takes years. You know, there were people I sent press releases to for years before they paid any attention to me or knew who I was, and it just takes time. But in that case, he had either heard of us before or just felt friendly that day and just said yes. So I don't know, there's not much craft to that, but.
Well, I have a follow-up just in terms of
Yeah.
the contents of that pitch actually.
Yeah.
Is it, can I tell you what I think it is? And you tell me.
Go for it.
Okay. So this is who we are, this is what we do, and this is why we're different. And and this is what we would like from you.
Yeah.
You know?
In this case, we had a product that was really specific, which was our show. So like, we're a string trio. We've been in town for about 5 years. We play the music of living composers. We have this new show coming up, which is about kind of about spirituality, and it features the music of Andrew Norman. He wrote a bunch of music depicting like Italian churches, and the piece is really architectural. Like, we want to come on the show and talk about, you know, Andrew Norman, because he just was like a Pulitzer finalist. So you just, you know, you look for all these little, why is he going to care? Like, he doesn't really care about me. He doesn't know who I am, but he might like be interested in music and architecture, or the fact that we're doing a music theater piece. So you try to just, you have to have a sense, as Ben was saying, of what's going to be interesting out there. Like there's what you think is interesting, and then there's, you know, what someone else might find interesting. So yeah, as performers, you are pitching like, why is this show going to be cool? Why should you come? In that case, it's like, you're going to buy a ticket, like, you know. So yeah, that's another level of buy-in. It's not a really high level of buy-in, but actually getting people's time is one of the hardest things. Getting them to show up to your thing.
When getting people's attention in Chicago when it comes to performing arts,
Yes, it's extremely competitive, which is why it took years for anyone to pay attention to our press releases. Like I sent Alison many press releases, you know. I was like, Alison is very busy, like she's probably not going to get back to me, but it would be stupid for me not to share this with her in case this could find a place in something that she's doing, you know, when she was
I would
reporting.
just underscore that, like for a show like that where you have multiple people, you have a host, you have producers, you should, even though I know that at CHF we get really frustrated if someone blankets us, I do think you should try different points of entry. But in a friendly, like, you know, it shouldn't look like you're just blanketing people. There should be some personal kind of, you know, approach in it. Because it is about someone's interest, and also it's about timing.
Like if you're really busy that day, but you have a producer who was had some time.
Producers saying, no, this could be a really good segment. You need to find someone to advocate for it, which I think was Ben, like that scenario you had where 12 people shit on your idea. Like you need to find the advocate too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is in terms of when I was pitching to BEZ or other outlets like NPR or CBC or whatever, I would try and think about what's the micro story, like what are the details that feel super personal and emotional and interesting and human, and then what's the macro story? So why does this matter at this point in time? Why should people care right now? Like I pitched a story to NPR about this Olympic swimmer named Dara Torres, who is she's the only woman who's been in like 5 consecutive Olympics, which is like eons for an athlete. But I got an in because my best friend from high school is her personal trainer. So I got to go and follow her. So I had this access. I already had a little bit of tape. I pre-interviewed her, so I had some really juicy, like good audio clips I could send to be like, there's more where that came from if you pay me. And then just talking about the macro trends of like women's bodies and women in sports and women in health and just like amazing Olympians and doping scandals. And so I could tie it into some of these larger narratives that like they're always looking for.
Yeah, I think that saying that is great, because that is a good pitch.
Yeah.
Like it's incredibly specific and unique, and also here's the bigger sort of story that it's a part of, which, you know, that's why it's not, I mean, there are a million unique things going on, like why this feels like it should take up our incredibly limited space, either on a radio program, in a magazine, wherever it is.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
I'll just answer it since there was a silence. I'm thinking about one time when I used a little bit of like, I knew that a magazine had a shakeup, and that someone had told me that they all had gone in a meeting and they were like, we need to do different kinds of stories. And so I used that to like write them right away and pitch a story about NASCAR. Because it was a totally different kind of story for them. And I think I even might have used their own language. Like, you know, I know you're looking for different kinds of stories. And, you know, it was both like, you know, this NASCAR race here in Tennessee, like really specific, but also like this giant NASCAR sort of in decline, and like what this means, sort of like you know, this bigger story. And I was able to sort of do it, and it was you know, super fun to do. And so, but you thinking about like that was useful. It wouldn't have gotten assigned otherwise.
Yeah, and just to add one thing, if you're thinking about like a story basis or a project basis or, you know, a longer term thing, what I did to sell Curious City to WBEZ, because they ultimately had to say yes to do it, is I read their mission. I read their founding documents. I read about them, and I threaded in their own language to that of saying, your mission is to serve the public, to do this, blah, 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 and then basically bullet pointed and parroted back that language as to how this helps them achieve their mission. So if you're thinking like on a story basis or a project basis, you could read up on them and then pair it with what they purport to be about.
Yeah, like on the other side of that, like working at the magazine side, you could always tell when people didn't know anything about the magazine, but they were pitching you.
Yeah.
And it was like, of all the, you know, if you had to choose between the people who were avid readers and passionate and knew about it, or the person who could give a fuck, you're gonna, you know, but wanted a job. like you're going to pick the avid reader, the person who knew it intimately, because you don't have to like translate any of it, they cared. And so, I mean, often that's just a little bit of work on your part to like, find a couple stories you like to sort of understand what the gist of the place is that you're pitching.
Have any of your previous jobs ever come back to haunt you? Like, did you do something when you needed money that someone later was like, why did you write that? Like, or question you about your involvement with a particular company or person?
Oh, that's such a good question. Everyone should be asked that question. That's so interesting.
It's like an interview for the FBI.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say no.
Okay.
No. So I think, like, in your question, I hear, like, maybe a little bit of anxiety about doing the wrong thing right now and it coming back to haunt you. I don't know if you have that anxiety. But I would say no. Like, no one cares. I mean, sometimes if you go into a job interview, like when I interviewed for a 9-to-5, they were like, what are you doing in here?
Yeah.
Basically, like, you're qualified for this job, but, like, why are you here? Because this seems weird. And I had to be, ready to answer, like any job interview. But no, I wouldn't say, weird pictures of me online from when I was like in a youth symphony and I was like 11. I mean, that's the thing about the internet. It's weird. Things do, they live, but they don't die.
I think when I was, so I canvassed for Obama before I became a journalist, and then there were a bunch of pictures on me that were on Facebook that were tagged with my, face on it, like at his, when he got nominated in Grant Park, and everyone was out there, and, everyone's crying and whatnot. So like untag, because it, can hurt your credibility as a journalist. So that was something that I was the first time conscious of, like, oh yeah, I can't really, have that be out in public.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question about social media and the role of Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. How much do you use? How much time do you spend on it? Is it crucial for you? And all this that stuff. And what is your favorite social media?
The most useful?
Ooh. Those might be two different things, favorite and most useful.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Thoughts?
I mean, you're sort of in a different sphere in a way. Like, I don't use LinkedIn. I've sort of joined a couple of times just to reach people when I'm trying to doing reporting. And I keep Facebook mostly personal, and I use Twitter like more professionally. And I think, as I said before, like, I probably could have done a lot more to, I think it's a great way to build an audience and to reach people. People who are sort of wired that way, who are like, want to comment and write in little bits all the time, and it's not taking away from the daily work you have to do. I think it's a great way to sort of, keep that energy going.
Yeah. And I mean, for my company, like, we have someone who's, one of their main roles is to be looking at social media and tweeting about things and sharing successes with our partners and tweeting other relevant stuff. So they're more focused on it. I'll jump in every so often and add something here or there. I personally have this struggle between, what is going on out there? Is there a tiff? Okay, we'll see. Someone's yelling. But yeah, I think I personally have this struggle between figuring out Facebook and Twitter and, like, when is it a tool for self-promotion and telling your story and building your brand, which makes me like, but also, like, I know I have to do on a certain level for people to know what I'm up to think of me when they're thinking of, whoa. Everything okay out there?
I think they're kids.
Okay, they're kids. All right, good. All right, it's joyful yelling.
Okay, good.
Yeah, you never know. But yeah, so trying to figure out what's the right recipe, and it's interesting and ethically complex of trying to figure out, like, my sister-in-law was mad at me because I didn't post a song that she wrote on Facebook because I post about other people's things when they do things. I'm like, oh, crap. Like, the ethics of when you're promoting other people's work or your own work, or just saying, like, I made the most amazing paella or whatever people are doing. I find it hard to find that balance, and I'm trying not to be annoying in terms of, like, having to build a brand and a company and put myself out there. But I never feel comfortable being like, look at this article, check out this thing I said. It just feels gross, but I don't know.
Yeah, for musicians, in my field, it's, like, kind of essential. Like, you have to have your own website where people can hear what you sound like. You know, you have to be, yeah, sorry, it's kind of a little.
Yeah, I actually don't know what's going on.
Oh, okay. Okay. It wasn't what you thought. Okay. But I would say, like, in the best, most innocent, most charitable way you could construe social media is you're sharing your work with people so that they can find you, so that they know what you're all about. And people actually want to know. It's probably the same as asking for money.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I don't want to ask you for money. But actually, there's someone out there who desperately wants to give money to Jen's company because they really care about what she does. It's not, you're not begging, it's not a favor, it's a good match. So same with social media attention. Like, there are people who I'm so glad they shared, like, pieces that they wrote, you know. So I guess if you can think, you know, people really care, it's okay that I'm saying this. And also, this is letting people know what I do so they can find me. I think that's ideal. But it's also important to note that this is like a new thing, and simultaneously living and then choosing what about your life to broadcast is weird. You know, we've only been doing that for a very short amount of time. Like, most other human beings didn't have to be quite so constantly thinking about, what do I share? So I think it makes sense that we feel ambivalent about it. Yeah.
So, but I mean, I started out, I think, by saying I'm writing a story that's actually due tomorrow about Chance the Rapper. And so here is this guy who is unsigned to any label, and sort of like his phenomenon is a way, like one of many ways of what he's built up on social media. Like, he's managed to promote himself and build a sort of direct-to-consumer audience, and then market that widely. And it's extraordinary. I mean, so he's like on the extreme of what you could do with this. And then, like, you know, why would he be on Saturday Night Live, for example, without having a label? Or, like, you know, why do people even know that he has a free, download at this point? And so clearly this is like, you know, it's new, but it's also like, I think about, compared to when I was just saying the YouTube story I did about 5 years ago, like that's like, 50 years in internet years have passed. And like the YouTubers that I was writing about then, like whatever, like Chance is like, 12.0 versus them of like what he's doing. And so like, there's a way, when you look at people who are doing it effectively as kind of, especially if you're your own brand, it's impressive, and there's a lot of room in there to sort of to gain from it.
And I heard someone say once that you should do the form of social media that just feels good to you. Or the form of sharing your work that feels best to you is what you should do. Because if you say, like, I'm going to tweet 5 times a day, but you hate Twitter, like, it's silly for you to make that commitment. You should figure out, like, where do I kind of feel at home, and then just use that channel, the path of least resistance where you feel some comfort. And yeah.
That's good advice, yeah.
Like, I send an email, I send it almost every week. And that form feels really good to me because it's a little bit longer, it's mostly personal. I say things in that I would not say on Facebook and Twitter because it's not public. I mean, it's a forwardable email, but it's not like as public as Facebook. So yeah, different venues for different kinds of sharing too, I think.
Yeah. You send that to a group of people, like your network?
Yeah, it's people who have subscribed, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, academics don't think about, like, let me build my email list. But it's probably true that a few hundred people do exist who would open an email from you every week to read about your work, I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah, even if it's like an occasional dispatch, I think I still read the things that people send out that are more personal, who are like in my professional network or personal networks, where it's like every 4 months, like, here's what I'm up to, a few like little snippets that aren't on Facebook or that are tidally contained, and that they're asking something of you of, hey, I'm going to be coming through Chicago, or anyone knows someone I can stay with in New York. I feel like you could like think of your social media as a mini newsletter that you get to control the environment and the delivery mechanism.
I think when we sort of put this panel together, we thought, like, you represent what is going to be the way of work for a lot of people, and either for a period of time or as a life, as a career. And I just wondered if you had any sort of parting words or thoughts for people who are about to plunge into this, like a rule to live by or?
Comfort with ambiguity is the new black. Like, comfort with ambiguity is the new black. Like, if you're comfortable with ambiguity, you can roll with this really weird moment that we're in. And the more, I guess, going back to like inner work, I'm total proponent of inner work. The more you can do to get comfortable with not knowing and, being comfortable in those moments, I think will serve you well.
A thing I would say too is, when Jen was saying, I would work for myself for 60 grand, but I would never do this much work for someone else for 60 grand. I think that's kind of the ultimate thing of working for yourself. And I learned it because I went to go work for someone else for a little while. And now I really know, it's so easy to complain because it's very hard. But when you get to work that hard, for something that you really care about, if it is what you really care about, it's really, really a blessing, and you're so fortunate. So everybody, all jobs are hard, but I think there's something about that real kind of ownership and building something you care about that's what I think makes it worth it. So
yeah, I guess also, I think that my father is definitely not the kind of person who ever gives advice, but one time he said sort of just life is long and you could have many careers. And I found that already to be true, to do completely different things. And the things that we're talking about, you can be fully invested in them and do them for 7 years and then do something totally different for 7 years and, kind of do something again. And, they're all accretive, they're all adding up. But I don't know, being open to that seems pretty, just listening to you starting a company or changing, that's, this feels like it could be a piece for a lot of people, but also, be open to sort of something more institutional too, back and forth. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
thank you.
Good meeting you guys.